Chapter 321, Unseen Magic. Dumbledore temporarily shifted his focus from the Horcrux to the locket itself. He gazed at the exquisitely crafted, gleaming locket in silence, while Atticus Blaine stood by, lost in his own thoughts. The phantom of Godric Gryffindor that had once appeared on the island of Avalon, along with its final words, "Salazar's Chamber of Secrets holds the answers to all doubts," lingered in Atticus's mind. This revelation made Atticus realize that the founding Big Four of Hogwarts had foreseen events that would unfold over the millennium. Did they know about Voldemort and his transformation of their family's legendary magical items into malevolent Horcruxes? "Come with me, Atticus," Dumbledore said suddenly, his tone serious. "Have you discovered something, Headmaster?" Atticus asked casually as he rose to follow, but Dumbledore offered no reply. He led Atticus swiftly through several corridors, eventually arriving at the private room in the low tower of the headmaster's office. In the corridor leading to the office, torches on either side dispelled the darkness and cold, yet the air retained a simple, mysterious atmosphere. The stone gargoyle guarding the entrance leapt aside at the sight of Dumbledore, not even waiting for the password. "Wait here for me, Atticus," Dumbledore instructed hastily before ascending a staircase beside the wall to his bedroom, where he intended to retrieve something. "Am I being too hard on myself?" Atticus mused aloud, wandering around the vast headmaster's office with his hands clasped behind his back. He teased Fawkes, the phoenix perched on a golden branch, and browsed through Dumbledore's extensive collection of books. "Hey, little guy!" A voice suddenly broke the silence of the office, tinged with suppressed excitement. Atticus turned his head, his gaze scanning the room until it settled on a row of magical portraits on the wall. "Any advice, Headmaster Black?" Atticus asked, smiling and nodding slightly when he saw the name engraved beneath the frame. "Shut up, fool," snapped a stern-looking old wizard in the adjacent frame. "Didn't you hear Dumbledore's order? Don't discuss his affairs until your foolish grandson's reputation is restored." This was Armando Dippet, Dumbledore's predecessor. Atticus raised an eyebrow, knowing little about this historical figure, save for the infamous book Armando Dippet, Master or Idiot, by a renowned Daily Prophet reporter. During his school years, Atticus had been too focused on honing his skills to indulge in such miscellaneous books. "You're just jealous," Phineas Black retorted, though today he seemed in particularly high spirits and paid little heed to Dippet, who often looked down on him. "Don't be shy, little guy. Come here, let's talk." Phineas beckoned Atticus with a smile. "What are your orders, Headmaster Black?" Atticus inquired, smiling with his hands behind his back and his head held high. "Oh, what a humble and polite young man, truly worthy of being a wizard from the great Slytherin house." Phineas grinned, his eyes narrowing. "I must thank you, young man. For years, I've tried to convince some fools around me that a noble black family descendant couldn't be a shameless traitor. Yet, due to their terrible prejudice, they chose to ignore the truth. Now, they have nothing to say." Phineas tugged at his goatee, beaming with pride. "We all know about my upright great-great-grandson, and it's all thanks to you, Atticus Blaine. I've decided to express my gratitude by recommending you as the next headmaster of Hogwarts before Dumbledore joins us on the wall," declared Principal Black. "Thank you for your kindness, Principal Black," Atticus replied with a cheerful laugh. "Sirius has already compensated me, so there's no need to worry." "Oh, has he now?" Phineas was momentarily taken aback, then his expression turned curious. "What did my ineffective great-great-grandson promise you?" "Well, he mortgaged the old Black family house to me." "What?" Phineas erupted in anger. "That worthless prodigal dares to die. Oh, this without my consent. He doesn't need to consult a picture frame hanging on the wall to sell the house, you fool," Atticus retorted, noticing Phineas's impatience. Meanwhile, the previously sullen Dippet perked up as Dumbledore appeared at the top of the stairs. Atticus turned and walked towards the slender-legged desk, while Phineas anxiously tapped his picture frame. "Wait, young man, we need to discuss the house." "What are you talking about?" Dumbledore inquired brightly as he descended the last step, holding a box. "Ah, Headmaster Black is helping me plan how to become the next headmaster of Hogwarts," Atticus said with a smile. He offered some very constructive suggestions. "It's too early to discuss that, Phineas," Dumbledore remarked, glancing at Black's picture frame. He raised his voice with a smile. For at least 2 more years, I haven't considered hanging myself on the wall. After sharing a light-hearted moment, they returned to the matter at hand. Dumbledore handed the box to Atticus and gestured for him to open it. As Atticus peered inside, his eyes widened in astonishment. "You repaired it?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Inside the box lay the Crown of Wisdom, once belonging to Ravenclaw and previously destroyed by Atticus. Now it was no longer broken into 2 pieces with black burn marks, but had been meticulously restored. Under the candlelight, a luxurious sky-blue gemstone gleamed at the crown's center. Atticus had attempted to repair the crown himself, but Ravenclaw's diadem was no mere ornament. It was a legendary magical artifact. "Yes, it had to be done," Dumbledore replied calmly. "After all, the crown is a precious cultural relic that embodies the history of Hogwarts. As headmaster, I am obliged to preserve it for the school." Atticus shook his head slightly, unfazed by Dumbledore's feigned ignorance. He turned the crown over, examining the mysterious runes engraved on the back of the raven. After a moment, he asked, "Does this crown truly grant the bearer incredible wisdom, as the rumors suggest? Have you tried it, Headmaster Dumbledore?" "Certainly," Dumbledore replied with a playful smile. "But perhaps I'm too stubbornly foolish, as even Ravenclaw's diadem couldn't bring me any significant improvement. You might want to give it a try, Atticus. It could offer you some inspiration." Dumbledore's teasing prompted Atticus to roll his eyes. He then asked, "So, why did you bring out this diadem? Earlier, when you were inquiring about the runes on the Slytherin locket, I had a realization. How did Ravenclaw's diadem survive your encounter?" Dumbledore mused, looking down at the Crown of Wisdom in Atticus's hand. "You understand what I mean, Atticus. What kind of metal can be split in 2 by fiendfire without melting once Tom's soul is gone? I can't think of any metal that would do that, unless there's some unseen magic protecting it in the shadows." End of this chapter. Chapter 322, Horcrux -1. Atticus Blaine stood deep in thought, pondering the challenge before him. He needed a metal that could withstand the intense heat of fiendfire without relying on magic. Various magical metals flashed through his mind, yet none seemed to meet the requirements. His gaze returned to the crown, and his eyes narrowed with concentration. Just as Dumbledore had overlooked the runes due to the Horcruxes, Atticus had missed this detail as well. "Some kind of magic we can't perceive protects these objects in secret. Even fiendfire and Horcruxes can't corrode them," Atticus murmured, frowning. "Could it be the legacy of Helga Hufflepuff and Godric Gryffindor?" "Just a moment, please," Dumbledore interjected, swiftly moving to the bookshelf beneath the portraits of past headmasters. He scanned the rows of gilded book spines, quickly locating his target. With purpose, he strode to the wall behind his desk and retrieved the sword of Gryffindor hanging there. Atticus had seen this sword the previous year when Harry used it in a battle against a basilisk in the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets. He also knew a secret about the sword that could cause an uproar if revealed. The famous Gryffindor sword was not Godric Gryffindor's original saber. The original lay in Atticus's storage bag, while the blade before him, gleaming with a silver light, was the broken steel holy sword of King Arthur, the ruler of the Camelot dynasty. Dumbledore's intention in presenting the sword was clear to Atticus. He hefted the heavy treasure, his eyes tracing the runes etched along the blade, similar to those on the diadems and lockets. "This sword has always been in your possession, Headmaster Dumbledore. Haven't you noticed it before?" Atticus asked, setting the sword back on the table after examining it. "Actually, I have," Dumbledore replied unexpectedly. "I noticed early on that the true rune engraved on the sword's hilt could be drawn from the sorting hat by any true Gryffindor. I assumed the ancient magic inscribed on the rune was just that." Dumbledore spread several books across the table, pointing to illustrations on the yellowed pages. Compared to the diadem lost for 1,000 years, belonging to Lady Rowena Ravenclaw, and the unknown locket left by Salazar Slytherin, whose hand holds the Hufflepuff cup. The answer was not a well-guarded secret. The cup had been passed down through generations of Hufflepuff descendants until it fell into Voldemort's hands. "We can find some reliable information," Dumbledore continued. The book contained images of the golden cup from various angles. While most would be drawn to the vivid badger on its front, Atticus focused on the subtle runes at the cup's base. "I suspect we won't find these rune notes in any existing rune book," Dumbledore observed, watching Atticus's thoughtful expression. These runes were likely created by the 4 founders of Hogwarts, each using them to enchant their respective items. "A reasonable assumption," Atticus agreed, his gaze shifting between the locket, the crown, the sword of Gryffindor, and the books. After a moment, he looked up, eyes alight with curiosity. "Do you think if we find the gold cup left by Hufflepuff, and all 4 items are gathered, something interesting might occur?" "There are no clues or records to confirm this theory," Dumbledore replied calmly, observing Atticus's keen interest in the inscribed artifacts. Runes glimmered, casting a strange light in Atticus Blaine's eyes, but he chose not to delve further. After a long pause, Atticus let out a heavy sigh. Ever since the druid girl had appeared before him in haste and vanished just as quickly, the once normal magical world had taken on an eerie quality. An unknown conspiracy seemed to weave through time, involving figures like Merlin and Morgan Le Fay from over a dozen centuries ago, the rumored Reaper within Morgan, and the founding Big Four of Hogwarts. These historical legends were far beyond Atticus's current ability to contend with, yet somehow he found himself entangled in their web. "Let's focus on this for now," Atticus murmured, pushing these overwhelming thoughts aside and gathering his resolve. "Headmaster Dumbledore, what do you intend to do with the soul fragments in this locket? Destroy them or keep them temporarily?" "In my opinion, there's no need to preserve them," Dumbledore replied, his tone turning solemn at the mention of Horcruxes. "Very well," Atticus shrugged, letting his wand rest in his palm. "The soul fragments are hidden within the locket, and the box must be burned along with it. However, I have a feeling these items will be significant in the future. Please, step back a couple of steps, Headmaster Dumbledore, unless you wish to risk your beard." "It's not just the beard, Atticus," Dumbledore quickly interjected, waving his hand. "If possible, I'd like to preserve my office as well. Many items here belong to Hogwarts, not just to me. Don't worry, we can opt for a slightly gentler method." Horcruxes represented the darkest of black magic, and destroying one required equally severe measures. In Atticus's experience, all magic capable of destroying a Horcrux would cause significant environmental damage. Some dark spells could even taint the magical energy of an area, but fiendfire was the most controllable. Dumbledore's suggestion of a slightly milder approach piqued Atticus's curiosity. Dumbledore approached the shelf where wine was once stored and tapped the innermost partition with his wand. Instantly, the dark wooden board twisted like liquid, its color fading until it was as clear as water. Reaching inside, Dumbledore retrieved a box, then swiftly returned to his desk with it in his arms. "This is," Atticus began, squinting as a foul odor wafted from the box when Dumbledore opened it. "Ah, you recognize it," Dumbledore chuckled, his silver beard fluttering as the fangs inside the box shifted. "These are the fangs of the basilisk you subdued." Fudge mentioned that the Ministry of Magic entrusted Mr. Newt Scamander with the care of the basilisk, Atticus noted. "Indeed, it's no secret that Newt is a dear friend," Dumbledore replied with a candid smile. "While I may not be as adept with fiendfire as you, I needed a reliable means to destroy Horcruxes, so I asked Newt to examine them. Only old basilisks have such potent fangs." Atticus nodded, acknowledging the truth. "It seems Mr. Scamander truly excels with magical creatures." "Newt is a pure-hearted wizard," Dumbledore agreed. "Those with pure intentions often find it easier to earn the trust of magical beings. Honestly, I'm quite grateful to Salazar Slytherin. Without his basilisk, safely destroying Tom's Horcruxes would be far more challenging." End of this chapter. Chapter 323, Horcrux -1. Atticus Blaine blinked, his thoughts racing. Salazar Slytherin had left behind the basilisk, inadvertently aiding in the destruction of a Horcrux created by his bloodline thousands of years later. Was this mere coincidence, or was there another possibility? Among the Big Four, Slytherin was the staunchest advocate for the purity of blood and heritage. If he had foreseen certain truths over the millennia, he would not have remained passive. The door to the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets was evidence of this. Slytherin would never allow anyone to tarnish the family's honor, and Tom Riddle's actions in the wizarding world would certainly not have been appreciated by his esteemed ancestor. "Now, there is another problem we face," Dumbledore began, clearing his desk of all items except for the undestroyed pendant, which lay there quietly. Atticus, who had personally destroyed 2 Horcruxes, felt no particular apprehension about what was to come. He stated calmly, "If we use the basilisk fangs, we may need to open the locket. Snake fangs cannot penetrate the defensive spells of the Horcrux itself." "Indeed," Dumbledore replied with composure. "Fortunately, I have made some preparations in advance. I taught Tom and know his style. From the first time I met him, he demonstrated his unusual talent inherited from Salazar Slytherin, the ability to speak Parseltongue. I doubt he would miss an opportunity to showcase his unique gift." Atticus remained silent, observing Dumbledore with quiet anticipation. The atmosphere in the office grew tense. The portraits of past headmasters on the walls held their breath, their eyes fixed on the locket. An ancient headmaster from centuries past removed his spectacles, wiping them vigorously on his robe before placing them back on his nose. These headmasters seemed eager to step out of their frames, if only the situation allowed. "So?" Dumbledore nodded at Atticus, extending his right hand. With a crisp snap of his fingers, an old hiss resonated through the office. Under everyone's watchful gaze, the locket clicked open. A sudden gust of wind swept through the room, despite the closed windows and doors. The bright candlesticks, adorned with dozens of candles hanging from the ceiling, dimmed abruptly, as if the river of hell had invaded the world. As the locket's lid sprang open, streams of thick, impenetrable darkness surged forth like a flood breaching a dam. These dark magical forces, tangible and claw-like, claimed the office's dome, displaying their depravity and malevolence. In the void, a tearing, demagogic growl echoed. Within the boiling fog, a ferocious face gradually took shape, looming over the world like a king of darkness. Dumbledore and Atticus stood side by side, their movements synchronized. They placed their hands at their stomachs, raised their heads, and solemnly stared at the formidable soul fragment suspended in midair. A strange light flickered in their differently colored eyes. "I see your heart," the cruel voice intoned, a chorus of thousands of tormented souls. Its gaze met Dumbledore's in midair, and the face, adorned with a cruel smile, froze. "Really, Tom?" Dumbledore smiled. "I always thought no one understood me." As Dumbledore's words settled, his blue eyes sharpened. In a fleeting moment, his tall figure seemed to rise from the horizon, exuding an imposing presence so fierce that the Horcrux, lacking much reason, instinctively averted its gaze. "I know all your desires," the voice continued, as if an invisible force interfered. With the stability of Voldemort's soul fragments in question, the ferocious face formed by the black mist trembled violently. It eagerly absorbed the darkness of human nature to strengthen itself. Casting its malevolent gaze upon Atticus Blaine, it whispered, "The cowardly man ruled by the fear of death." Atticus snorted coldly. "How dare you presume to know my desires?" In the next moment, his eyes blazed with light, and a tyrannical magic power, rivaling that of Dumbledore, erupted from his slender fraw, causing the world to spin around him. Dumbledore, Atticus, and the escaped soul fragments from the locket simultaneously left the inner office, appearing in an illusory space. This space was boundless, akin to the high-dimensional realm wizards briefly inhabit when they apparate, surrounded by chaotic and indescribable spatial turbulence. Boom! As Voldemort's Horcrux grew restless, the auras of Dumbledore and Atticus surged in unison. Golden and purple magic, resembling flames, burst from their bodies, weaving together in the void to form a net that spanned the sky, trapping the roaring soul fragments in a closed space from which they could not escape. The surrounding spatial turbulence, ebbing and flowing like seawater, seemed to encounter 3 massive celestial bodies, constantly impacting the magical grid, sealing the Horcrux with an even more chaotic trajectory. The soul fragments dashed left and right within the spherical magic net, each roaring impact distorting it, yet they remained unable to break free. Under the combined magical power of Dumbledore and Atticus, 2 of the leading wizards in the magical world, Voldemort's soul fragments never collapsed due to the Horcrux's unique properties. "Atticus." Dumbledore's aged voice reached Atticus's ears with precision in the chaotic space. Receiving the signal, Atticus nodded slightly. He raised his right hand, beckoning to the turbulent space. A miniature hurricane, wrapped around the basilisk's fangs, suddenly appeared. Sensing its impending destruction, the imprisoned soul fragments descended into madness. The large face disintegrated, transforming into hundreds of thousands of meteor-like black clouds that furiously assaulted the purple and gold web of magic from all directions. Atticus squinted, tracking the trajectories of the black clouds with tail flames, each leaving a clear reflection in his eyes. After a brief analysis, he locked onto one. With a flick of his index finger, the basilisk's fangs trembled, emitting a deep buzzing sound, then shot into the black cloud with the force of a comet striking the earth. Ding! A crisp, pleasant sound resonated through the illusory space, followed by a light that seemed to open up the world, melting everything in sight and extinguishing the roars of unwillingness and fear. Atticus had already departed. Before leaving, he requested to take Ravenclaw's diadem and Slytherin's locket, which he had found. After a moment's thought, Dumbledore agreed, with one condition. Atticus must not sell these items for money. Albus, the headmaster's office, enveloped in an inexplicable atmosphere, remained silent for a long time. Finally, Armando Dippet, the former headmaster of Hogwarts, spoke. Dumbledore asked solemnly, "You've made up your mind to change your approach, haven't you? I mean, let Atticus Blaine." "All this time, I've been searching for a safe way to deal with Tom," Dumbledore said, leaning back in his chair and gazing up at the dome, his expression unreadable. "We all know that perhaps I can defeat Tom in a duel, but that won't solve the problem. The Horcrux is just one of the issues. As long as it exists, as long as I am alive, Tom will never let his guard down. He will always lurk in the shadows, using his formidable skills. The conspiracies and machinations of the wizard have thrown the wizarding world into prolonged chaos, exacerbated by the spiritual connection between Harry and Tom. In short, I am growing weaker, and time is on Tom's side." "But Atticus Blaine," Principal Dippet interjected sharply, "I don't deny that this young man is exceptionally powerful, Albus. Given time, he might indeed reach the heights you once achieved. However, you know very well that if you allow him to proceed, the wizarding world will be plunged into a fierce war." After a long silence, Dumbledore sighed deeply. It was never inevitable. End of this chapter. Chapter 324. 8 in the morning. Typically, this was the bustling hour when young wizards and faculty members would descend to the auditorium for breakfast. However, the previous night's thrilling Quidditch match had left most of the students from the four houses sleepless, especially those from Gryffindor, who had spent nearly the entire night celebrating their house's qualification for the championship. The faculty, too, were weary from the events that transpired in the middle of the night. On this rainy morning, even the most diligent professors were catching up on sleep in their quarters. Madame Pomfrey, who had been busy for most of the night, was also resting in her room. Harry, unable to sleep, slipped into Ron's ward early in the morning. Seeing Ron looking relatively well, the two young wizards decided to check on Hermione. However, Hermione appeared exhausted, leaning against her pillow with her usually bushy hair in disarray and her eyes bloodshot, as if she hadn't slept at all. "You are simply unreasonable," Ron exclaimed, his cheeks puffing up in surprise when he saw the tome spread out on Hermione's lap, his head wrapped in gauze. "After everything that's happened, you still have the mind to read?" The previous night, everyone involved in the duel with the werewolf had been informed. Peter had been arrested and brought to justice, while Sirius was taken into custody by the Ministry of Magic. Until the Wesengamot trial concluded, everyone was sworn to secrecy. However, Ron, who hadn't participated in the time travel, was unaware of the details surrounding Peter's arrest. When Harry quickly explained the situation, Ron's cheeks deflated, but his mouth gaped wide. "I missed out on something so incredible. Oh, you should have woken me up! Time travel! How many wizards get to experience that in their lifetime?" "Interesting," Harry replied with a reluctant smile. "If you'd met Hagrid's spider friends in the Forbidden Forest, Ron, I bet you wouldn't say that. I'll never let a spider near me again." Now, they all understood why. After everything that had happened the previous night, Hermione hadn't simply collapsed into bed. Instead, she had made a special trip to the library with Harry's invisibility cloak. "I can't imagine." Hermione finally reacted, burying her face in her hands. If my parents knew I might face prosecution by the Ministry of Magic, or even imprisonment in a wizarding prison, how would they feel? Her voice trembled with the threat of tears. I've checked many laws. The time turner is a magic item strictly controlled by the Ministry of Magic. If I can't provide a reasonable explanation for its damage, the Ministry won't let me off. But Ron, hearing that Hermione might be imprisoned for tampering with the magical hourglass, no longer regretted missing the latter half of the adventure. He said, dumbfounded, "You were doing this on Dumbledore's orders, weren't you? He wouldn't just stand by and watch." But the problem is, Harry sighed, having clearly pondered this issue. Although he reminded us, we can't talk about it, can we? We're in serious breach of the law, but how do you explain that to the Ministry of Magic? Surely, arresting criminals isn't one of the approved uses of time turners, right? Ron frowned, deep in thought. Maybe I can write to Dad. You know, he has a lot of acquaintances in the Ministry. Maybe he can give us some good advice. Of course, that's assuming this time turner thing isn't particularly expensive. Just as the three young wizards were fretting over the damage to the time turner, a sudden conversation erupted in the hall. The commotion outside the school hospital silenced the trio. "Just a few minutes. I came to see how everyone is doing, Miss Pomfrey." "They're doing very well, Professor Blaine." Madame Pomfrey's irritated voice cut in immediately. "The only thing they need now is not to be disturbed and to get some good rest, just like me." "It's Professor Blaine!" Harry exclaimed, turning swiftly from the edge of Hermione's bed. "Like I said last night, Hermione, Professor Blaine is great at fixing things. Maybe he can help you." Professor Blaine had managed to keep Ron's broken wand functional for a while longer, and had even pieced together Harry's Nimbus 2000, which had been shattered. Although it couldn't fly anymore, it was perfect for Quidditch beginners to experience the sensation of flying. "That's a good idea," Ron agreed enthusiastically. "There doesn't seem to be anything he can't do." Hermione, no longer anxious, tossed aside the quilt, jumped out of bed, and rushed to the door. She flung it open in a few quick strides. In the hall, Professor Blaine, who had been in a heated discussion with Madame Pomfrey, anticipated the movement before the door opened. He turned and offered Hermione a warm smile as she stood there, panting. "You don't look very well. Did you have a nightmare?" he asked kindly. To be honest, Harry harbored some resentment towards Professor Blaine. He had known the truth about Harry's parents' murder before Christmas, but hadn't shared it with him. However, Harry quickly forgot his grievances when Dumbledore recounted the events in the Forbidden Forest. Atticus had listened intently to those thrilling tales, and when Harry finished, he smiled approvingly. "Well done, all three of you. Especially you, Harry. Your parents would be proud. You and Hermione caught Peter, the traitor. That's as good as avenging your mom and dad." Harry beamed, though his face flushed with embarrassment. Professor Lupin got lost in the Forbidden Forest. Professor Dumbledore told us he'd be fine, but there's no sign of him." "Oh, about that," Atticus said, noting the trio's calm demeanor. He straightened his robe and rose from the stool. "Don't worry. Professor Lupin is receiving treatment at St. Mungo's, and his condition is stable. The only issue is that he may not be able to teach your Defense Against the Dark Arts class anymore. But that's probably for the best. If he had continued through the second half of the year, I can't guarantee there wouldn't have been a more serious accident." As Professor Blaine prepared to leave, Harry remained silent, allowing Hermione to have her moment. "Professor," Hermione began, listening intently for any interruptions at the door. Once she was sure they were alone, she turned and retrieved the tarnished time turner from under her pillow, biting her lip as she handed it to Professor Blaine. "Professor, this time turner, I don't know why, but it broke after last night. It's lost its function," she said, her shoulders trembling. "I'm afraid I'm in big trouble. The Ministry of Magic has strict control over time turners. They'll want to know what I've been doing with it." "Can you fix it, Professor Blaine?" Harry interjected, unable to contain himself as he watched Atticus examine the device. "I'll find a way to fix this," Professor Blaine replied cryptically. He didn't confirm whether he could repair the time turner, only that he could resolve the issue, and he took the broken device with him. With Professor Blaine's assurance, all three of them breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed as though they weren't worried at all about Atticus Blaine's ability to keep his promise. Speaking of which, Professor Lupine is actually a werewolf, Ron exclaimed, shivering slightly. This is terrible. Dumbledore always has a knack for doing the most unexpected things. He's safe, Ron, Harry countered. Since all the professors are aware of Professor Lupine's identity, it proves he's harmless. He's a friend of my parents, just like Sirius. He never intended to harm us. I know, Ron muttered, but you've all seen what a werewolf looks like when it goes berserk. Honestly, I think Professor Blaine is right. It's best for everyone to leave. End of this chapter. Chapter 3 and 25, The Weight of Rain. With a creak, the door hinges groaned as Atticus Blaine pushed open the door to another ward. In the dimly lit room, a hospital bed stood by the window, where Snape leaned against the headboard, gazing absent-mindedly at the rain-soaked world outside. The sound of the door opening drew his attention, and he turned to look at Atticus with eyes as dark and still as a secluded pool. Atticus felt a pang of sorrow as he met Snape's steady gaze. Once the door clicked shut, Atticus approached the bed. Snape had already turned his attention back to the window, remaining silent and seemingly lost in thought. The room felt heavy, perhaps due to the dampness in the air. Atticus chose not to disturb the silence, instead joining Snape in watching the relentless rain. The downpour seemed to wash over the world without end, its monotonous rhythm offering little solace, only a weariness that seeped into the soul. The last time Lucius visited you at Hogwarts, I brought Draco to your office afterward. You realized then that Draco was under some form of control, didn't you? Snape's voice broke the silence, though his eyes remained fixed on the rain. His tone was questioning, yet devoid of doubt. Indeed, Atticus replied with a slight nod. Afterward, I followed Draco and discovered Peter Pettigrew hiding in the owlery. He was plotting to find Sirius and attempt to kill him. Snape glanced at Atticus, but remained silent. After a moment of contemplation, Atticus decided to reveal his plan. Upon discovering Peter, I considered capturing him immediately, handing him over to the Ministry of Magic after consulting with Dumbledore. This would clear Sirius's name and ensure that the murderer of James Potter and Lily Evans faced justice. A profound pain flickered across Snape's face, momentarily breaking his cold composure. Atticus sighed softly, observing Snape's furrowed brow and clenched jaw. But then another thought occurred to me. Peter's betrayal led to the Potters' deaths, Sirius's wrongful imprisonment in Azkaban for 12 years, Remus losing all his closest friends, Harry growing up without his parents, and you, Professor Snape. Snape's eyes met Atticus's, trying to mask his surprise, but his occlumency faltered. I'm not naive, Professor Snape, Atticus continued, leaning back in his chair. The events of that time caused irreparable harm to many. While uncovering the truth, I also wanted to provide an opportunity for those affected to release their pent-up emotions. So I created certain conditions, ensuring everyone's involvement while maintaining safety. Then, you should have let me kill that filthy traitor with my own hands. Snape's voice trembled with suppressed rage, his sallow face etched with deep-seated hatred. It was only the second time Atticus had seen Snape lose control, the first being the night before he left Hogwarts the previous year. Snape's love for Harry's mother had become a guiding principle in his life. If Lily Evans were still alive, perhaps he could have escaped the shadow of that love. But she had perished in Godric's Hollow 12 years ago, extinguishing any hope Snape had of freeing his mind. Allowing Peter to die at the hands of Snape, Harry or Sirius would not bring true relief. There was no way to ease their pain, and at the same time, it would cause them to fall into even greater pain. Therefore, Atticus Blaine did not allow Peter to be exposed in front of them last night. After a heavy sigh, a long silence followed. Snape leaned back against the pillow, a solitary tear tracing a path down his cheek, his lifeless eyes conveying the depth of his shame. Atticus didn't attempt to console him. Instead, he sighed softly and gazed at the faint light breaking through the gloomy sky, lost in thought. Was there any way to lift Snape from the darkness in his heart? Atticus had pondered this question for some time, yet a solution eluded him. Once, he even considered using a time turner to transport Snape back 12 years, allowing him to bid farewell to Lily Evans. But upon reflection, he realized how foolish that idea was. What would happen if Snape saw Lily? She was a woman who cherished her family, her husband, and her child deeply, and she could offer Snape nothing. More importantly, Snape would never allow Lily to die after seeing her again. He would do everything in his power to save her, and the consequences of such actions were unpredictable, potentially sending the entire timeline spiraling into chaos. In that moment, Atticus found himself resenting his journey into a magical world. If he had ventured into a realm of immortals, he might have discussed reincarnation with Professor Snape. Reincarnation. Atticus frowned slightly. Death is not the end of everything. For millennia, countless wizards have tirelessly studied death in pursuit of eternal life. In this world, ghosts are the closest to death. According to their own accounts, after their original souls leave their bodies, they travel through a path filled with warmth and light to the world of death. Yet, no ghost can clearly describe that world, for they are all souls with lingering attachments to reality, never having truly reached the other side. The world of death. Atticus thought of the jellyfish world depicted on the 9 stone tablets in the central temple of Avalon Island. Perhaps one day, Atticus took a deep breath and stood up. You might meet Lily Evans in another world, but by then she might be a completely different person. Snape's suppressed sobs ceased abruptly, and he stared at Atticus in astonishment, as if unable to believe what he had just heard. Explain yourself, Atticus. Meeting Lily again, a completely different person. Are you joking? Atticus patted Snape on the shoulder, smiled, and stood up. If you truly can't forget Lily Evans, Professor, then keep that love in your heart and live. Perhaps one day you will meet again. On Sunday morning, the school was calm. In Gryffindor House, aside from Harry, Ron, and Hermione's roommates, no one even noticed their absence overnight. Meanwhile, in the Slytherin common room, Miss Parkinson inquired repeatedly, but couldn't determine where Draco, Crabbe, and Goyle had gone. She searched anxiously, worried that Draco might have secretly dropped out, as he had mentioned his father was considering sending him to a superior magic school in Germany. Mrs. Lestrange dissuaded Professor Snape, who had returned from the school hospital, from worrying. Draco and his 2 friends had been attacked by werewolves, seriously injured, and sent to St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries. 2 hours after Miss Parkinson left Professor Snape's office in a daze, astonishing news spread throughout Hogwarts. At the same time, the young wizards discovered that it was Harry who had uncovered the clue and, together with Professor Snape, Lupin, and Hagrid, had driven away the werewolves lurking in the Forbidden Forest with malicious intent toward Hogwarts. Rumors spread like wildfire, and everyone was eager to learn the truth. The students rushed to the school hospital, only to be promptly ushered out by the irate Madame Pomfrey, who wielded a broom with surprising authority. However, by noon, even more astonishing news swept through the corridors. This revelation, brought back by senior students returning from a weekend in Hogsmeade, sent the young wizards into a frenzy. Greyback and his pack of werewolves, who had terrorized the UK for years with their countless unforgivable crimes, had finally been defeated. This monumental victory was achieved under the leadership of 2 high-ranking officials from the Ministry of Magic, Cornelius Fudge, the Minister of Magic, and Barty Crouch, the Director of the Department of International Magical Cooperation. They were joined by Atticus Blaine, the head of the Auror Office and the Director of the Hogwarts Student Safety Office. Together, they orchestrated the downfall of this notorious gang of werewolves. With this threat eliminated, the residents of the wizarding world could finally breathe, a sigh of relief, free from the fear that had loomed over them for so long. End of this chapter. Chapter 326, Swept Away. The British magical world had enjoyed a long period of peace, with no explosive news for many years. However, within half a day of the werewolf incident being exposed, events escalated rapidly, spiraling almost out of control. After lunch, reporters from the Daily Prophet, Wizards Weekly, and numerous other domestic and international newspapers flocked to Hogwarts, eager to interview Atticus Blaine. Previously, this young wizard was known only within certain circles for uncovering the mystery of the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets and serving as the director of the Hogwarts Student Security Office. When Dumbledore stepped in to decline interview requests, citing Professor Blaine's ill health, the persistent reporters were undeterred. Letters of appointment invitations poured into Atticus's office window like snowflakes, reminding him of the time he helped Lockhart respond to fan mail the previous year. Some particularly determined reporters, frustrated by the closed gates of Hogwarts, even attempted to sneak onto the campus through the Forbidden Forest, risking their lives in the process. If not for Dumbledore's quick intervention, replacing Hagrid in negotiations with the forest's creatures, the consequences could have been dire. Ultimately, the reporters, left with no other option, turned to the residents of Hogsmeade, hoping to unearth valuable information. Meanwhile, within the school, the third-floor corridor buzzed with excited young wizards. They knew Professor Blaine was not one to stand on ceremony in private and hoped to glean some thrilling news. Unfortunately, the door to Professor Blaine's office remained firmly shut, as if no one was inside. That evening, a special edition of the Evening Prophet was released. Although the reporters failed to obtain any details about the werewolf extermination, they did manage to secure something noteworthy. A reporter purchased a photograph from a Hogsmeade villager for a hefty sum of gold coins. The villager, an astronomy enthusiast, had climbed to the highest nearby hillside, the one where the Shrieking Shack stood, to observe the planetary orbits through his telescope. He soon noticed activity on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. His telescope, capable of recording planetary movements, also captured the events unfolding 2 miles away. A young sorcerer, exuding a chilling aura, hovered high in the sky, unleashing towering flames upon the earth. The werewolves writhed and screamed in the inferno, succumbing one by one. The scene resembled divine retribution. When the newspaper arrived at Hogwarts via owl, the entire school was abuzz. As night descended, the school auditorium filled with the chatter of excited young wizards. When Atticus, who had been sequestered in his office, appeared on the steps near the foyer, the auditorium, reflecting the clear night sky, fell silent for half a minute. The students watched as Professor Blaine walked from the foyer into the auditorium, passing through the house tables and ascending to the faculty dining table. Suddenly, the room erupted in thunderous applause and cheers. "That's amazing, Professor!" shouted the Weasley twins from the Gryffindor table, raising their hands in excitement. "Can you teach me that, Professor?" Cedric from Hufflepuff called out, waving the Evening Prophet with admiration. Even the usually composed girls of Ravenclaw whispered excitedly among themselves, casting admiring glances at Atticus and occasionally breaking into giggles. "Please don't forget," Marcus Flint shouted to the entire auditorium, "Professor Blaine belongs to Slytherin." His voice echoed through the hall, and many Slytherins cheered in support. However, the enthusiasm was not shared by the other 3 houses, who chose to remain silent. At the staff table, all the professors raised their glasses to Atticus Blaine. "I think you'll soon be more famous than Lockhart ever was, Atticus," Professor McGonagall remarked, her lips curving into a restrained smile. "I hope you get used to the limelight, though it doesn't quite match your humble, low-key style." Despite the unprecedented attention, Atticus remained composed, showing neither panic nor undue pride. "Hey, I'll do my best to adjust," he replied with a slight smile. "Actually, I've long anticipated this day, Atticus." Professor Flitwick exclaimed, his voice deliberately softened, lending it an unusual tone. "Ever since you told me about your encounter with werewolves last year, I suspected you'd face them again, but I never imagined you'd handle it so decisively, Atticus." Dumbledore, who had been absent from the faculty dining table for some time, seemed unfazed by the attention shifting away from him. He listened quietly to the conversation, contentedly savoring the pork chops on his plate, clearly pleased with Atticus's calm demeanor. Meanwhile, at Hogwarts, Madame Pomfrey kept Harry and his friends, who knew the full story, in the hospital wing for observation. The Ministry of Magic, expected to release a statement, only issued a brief note about Greyback and his gang's defeat, withholding further details. Yet the incident stirred the wizarding world. In places like Hogsmeade, Diagon Alley, St. Catchpole, and Godric's Hollow, wizards buzzed about the downfall of Greyback's werewolf clan and the Ministry's triumph. Even the Muggle News reported that the notorious terrorist Fenrir Greyback had been shot dead by police. For 3 days, neither Hogwarts nor the Ministry of Magic entertained any interviews on the matter, a decision influenced by Atticus's suggestion. He believed that allowing curiosity to ferment would be beneficial. On Thursday, as dawn's light began to pierce the darkness, Atticus, who had risen early, stood in the student security office on the 3rd floor, adjusting his attire in front of a floating water mirror. Knowing he would make headlines today, he took extra care with his appearance. Professor Blaine. As he exited the castle and descended the marble stairs, Atticus spotted Hagrid by the path leading to the school gate, waving excitedly. Just the previous evening, the Ministry of Magic had officially invited Hogwarts staff and students who had significantly contributed to the mission against Greyback to an honors ceremony. Besides Remus Lupin, who was in intensive care, Hagrid and Snape were also invited. Snape, however, declined with a cold demeanor, viewing the act of saving Sirius as a personal disgrace. Hagrid, initially reluctant to participate for fear of bringing criticism to Dumbledore due to his half-giant status, was persuaded by Atticus with an irresistible argument. As for Harry and his friends, being underage wizards, their commendations would be presented directly by Hogwarts. The performance might mean that each person will gain some points, but they will lose others for sneaking into the Forbidden Forest late at night. "How do I look, Professor?" Hagrid asked nervously as they walked side by side across the deserted campus. He stroked his beard, clearly anxious. Today, Hagrid had shed his usual shabby overcoat in favor of an oversized suit, so wrinkled it could almost serve as a sail. A faint scent of cologne wafted from it, likely an attempt to mask the musty odor of the suit. "Very nice, Hagrid," that Atticus Blaine replied, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He had known Hagrid for quite some time, but this was the first occasion he had seen him dressed in such a manner. "I bet you look photogenic in this one." End of this chapter. Chapter 327, The Ministry of Magic. Ah! A slight explosion sent dust swirling through the air. It was 6 o'clock in the morning, and the bustling city center was caught in the delicate balance between night and day. Energetic young people were wrapping up their vibrant nightlife, heading home to rest, while middle-aged folks were just leaving their warm beds, preparing for the day ahead. "Looks like we were lucky, Hagrid, to avoid those crazy reporters," Atticus Blaine remarked, his gaze shifting from the majestic office buildings lining the street to a desolate alleyway. The street was dotted with a few long-abandoned companies and dilapidated taverns. He turned his attention to Hagrid. "What's the matter, Hagrid? Not quite used to traveling this way?" Atticus asked, frowning in mild surprise. "I'm sorry, Professor," Hagrid replied, wiping his face with a large hand. "The longest form of transportation I've ever used is the train and my own legs. Apparating. Well, the last time I did that was when I was expelled from Hogwarts, and Professor Dumbledore took me to the Ministry of Magic for a trial." Atticus chuckled, drawing his wand to clean the vomit from Hagrid's clothes and mask the lingering odor. "Next," he said, glancing around as he tried to recall the way to the Ministry of Magic. It had been 2 years since his last visit, right after graduation, when he had ventured into the underground world of Diagon Alley to handle his travel documents for a mission abroad. "This way, Professor," Hagrid said, taking the lead. He was more familiar with the route, having frequently run errands for Dumbledore. They approached a dilapidated red telephone box, its paint peeling and glass shattered. The lone microphone dangled precariously, as if a vandal had tried to rip it off. "Still the same," Atticus muttered, grimacing. "Why hasn't anyone bothered to fix it?" "Maybe because there are wizards like me," Hagrid replied with a shy smile. "Let me tell you a secret, Professor Blaine. The broken glass on the ground is my doing." Atticus had doubted the phone booth could accommodate both him and Hagrid, but to his surprise, they managed to squeeze inside, though the walls pressed uncomfortably against them. "Please, Hagrid, move your hand so I can dial," Atticus grunted, his face squashed against the cold metal. "Oh, sorry, Professor." Hagrid shifted, causing the booth to creak and a piece of glass to fall outside. "I hope the Ministry of Magic won't charge me for that. Now let me think. 62442? Atticus dialed the number. A cold female voice echoed in the booth. "Welcome to the Ministry of Magic. Please state your name and business." Atticus struggled to lift his face from the iron wall. Atticus Blaine and Rubius Hagrid here for the press conference and honors. Thank you, the voice replied. Guests, please take the badges and pin them to your clothes. 2 square silver badges slid out of a metal chute. After some effort, Atticus and Hagrid managed to attach them to their garments. It seemed wizards had a penchant for placing important institutions underground, whether it was the Ministry of Magic, the Goblins' Bank, or other such places. In the underground world, everything is buried deep beneath the surface, and the means of entry are equally challenging. A minute later, Atticus Blaine and Hagrid found themselves standing at the end of a long, resplendent hall. The polished wooden floor gleamed under the peacock blue ceiling, which was inlaid with glittering golden symbols that constantly shifted and changed, resembling a massive high-altitude bulletin board. The walls were paneled with black wood, and numerous gilt fireplaces were set into the panels. These fireplaces served as the primary mode of transportation for the Ministry of Magic's employees, whether commuting, traveling for business, or visiting locations across the country. The press conference was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning, while the Ministry of Magic's regular working hours began at 8. The hall was mostly empty, with only a few people present. Near the famous Magic Brothers fountain, a person was dozing off at a table. Whoosh! As they entered the magnificent underground hall of the Ministry of Magic, Hagrid visibly tensed, despite knowing he was there to receive an award, not to be judged. Don't worry, Hagrid, Atticus reassured him with a smile. Your appeal is straightforward, and Fudge will support you. Hagrid swallowed nervously, nodded, and followed Atticus forward. They approached the Magic Brothers fountain, and the young wizard with the safety check sign on his head was more alert than expected. Atticus hadn't intended to disturb his rest, but Hagrid's heavy footsteps woke him. Hey, wait! Eric, the gatekeeper mentioned by Fudge, blinked his sleepy eyes and stood up unsteadily. Don't forget to follow the rules, gentlemen, he said to Atticus with a yawn. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to disturb your rest, Atticus replied, stepping back with a smile. Oh, it's Hagrid, and you don't need to bother. I remember you don't have a wand. Despite the figures in front of him, Eric immediately recognized the towering figure of Hagrid. He reached out and took the wand Atticus handed over, placing it into the brass balance. The machine began to vibrate slightly. While waiting, Eric sighed and muttered about always being on the night shift. Let me see. Eric rubbed his eyes, struggling to focus. Ebony wood, 12 inches long, with a dragon heartstring core. It's been used for 12 years. He muttered weakly, poked the parchment with the test results onto a brass nail, and slowly handed the wand back. When his eyes fell on Atticus's face, which bore a warm smile, Eric Munch suddenly trembled, his sleepy eyes widening in disbelief. My God! Eric exclaimed, rubbing his eyes again. Atticus, is that you? Yes, it's been a while, Munch. How have you been? Atticus's smile deepened as he nodded. What, you know each other? Hagrid asked, scratching his beard in wonder. Of course, I know Atticus, Hagrid. Have you forgotten that Bill and I were in the same class? Eric's voice trembled with excitement. You single-handedly took down nearly 100 werewolves, including Greyback, right? That's what the Ministry said. You're a legend. Eric Munch had indeed been in the same class as Atticus, though one was in Gryffindor and the other in Slytherin. They hadn't interacted much during school, but they often shared potions and defense against the dark arts classes, so they were familiar with each other. I wasn't the only one responsible for defeating Greyback's werewolf tribe. The Ministry of Magic played a significant role, Atticus replied modestly. Speaking of which, in our class, there weren't many jobs in the Ministry of Magic had initially extended an invitation to Bill, but unfortunately, he ultimately decided not to attend. Eric nodded with a smile, seemingly indifferent to what Atticus Blaine was discussing. For Eric, simply having a conversation with Atticus was a great honor. Last year, there was a reunion for the graduates of Gryffindor House, and both Priyan and Philoa were in attendance, Eric recounted with enthusiasm. When I mentioned that I had heard from the Ministry about how you dispelled the rumors surrounding the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets and subdued the basilisk, they were both visibly shaken. Oh, ho ho! It seems you really gave them quite a scare. Eric spoke with great interest about those past events. The two individuals who had once infuriated Atticus now only brought a knowing smile to his face when their names were mentioned years later. End of this chapter. Chapter 328. Another Acquaintance. Atticus Blaine could tell that Eric hadn't been faring well at the Ministry of Magic in recent years. Otherwise, he wouldn't have cornered a classmate he barely knew and chatted incessantly for 10 minutes. Reflecting on it, Eric's work seemed as monotonous as the Centaur liaison office. "I'm sorry to bother you with reminiscing." Eric was whispering to Atticus when he overheard Bertha mention that Barty Crouch from the Department of International Magical Cooperation had been losing his temper over trivial matters lately. Suddenly, a stern witch's voice echoed from the elevator hall behind the golden door. The moment Eric heard this voice, he shuddered and immediately fell silent. Miss Amelia Bones, dressed in a dignified emerald wizard robe, emerged from the elevator hall. Her gaze lingered briefly on Eric before moving on, a hint of weariness on her face. With a faint smile, she addressed Atticus. "Connolly mentioned in your letter that you'd be at the ministry by 7 o'clock, so I'll show you the way." Few wizards could boast of being personally greeted by Miss Amelia Bones, a renowned figure in the European magical world. Eric shot Atticus an envious glance. "Thank you. I'm not very familiar with this place," Atticus replied with a smile, nodding at Eric. "We'll talk later." "Connolly is waiting for you in his office. We need to have a brief meeting before the official press conference begins," Ms. Bones stated succinctly. This wasn't the place for idle chatter, so Atticus simply nodded in agreement. With a series of dings, an elevator emerged from the dark shaft. The iron gate opened, and the three of them stepped inside. The gate closed with a clang, and the car began its ascent, the chains rattling. Soon, the indifferent voice of the woman in the phone booth announced their arrival. "4th floor, Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, Beasts, Outliers, and Ghosts Office, Goblin Liaison Office, Pest Advisory Office, Centaur Office, House Elf Relocation Office, Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures." The elevator stopped on the 4th floor. Outside the protective fence, a tall, stern-looking middle-aged wizard holding a piece of parchment waited for the elevator. Upon seeing Hagrid, who occupied half the car, he hesitated, but chose not to open the fence door. "Come in, Norris. The car will hold you," Ms. Bones nodded to the tall wizard outside and said. The wizard named Norris was silent for a moment, then nodded to Ms. Bones, opened the door, and entered the car. His presence made the car crowded, and Hagrid huddled in the corner, wishing he could curl himself into a ball. "Which floor are you going to?" Atticus asked. "Basement 1, Norris replied, glancing at Atticus with curiosity, wondering why this unfamiliar young wizard looked at him with a peculiar smile. He quickly turned his attention to Ms. Bones, raising the parchment in his hand. "I applied for a ghost that lost its mind from the ghost office. The experiment is complete, and I need to return the receipt to the logistics office." With that, Norris fell silent. The elevator soon reached the basement floor. As the fence door opened, Norris strode out, heading to the passage on the left. Atticus, with a lingering glance at the tall wizard, followed Ms. Bones to the minister's office on the right. The atmosphere on the basement floor, where the minister's office was located, was solemn and imposing, with an invisible weight pressing on everyone's hearts. Hagrid was visibly uneasy in the current atmosphere, frequently wiping the cold sweat from his brow as he followed closely behind. Atticus Blaine, however, walked with a steady gait, showing no signs of discomfort. "Norris Demand, from the Department of Mysteries," Ms. Bones introduced, casting a curious glance at Atticus, seemingly puzzled by his interest in Norris. Nevertheless, she provided a brief introduction. "The Department of Mysteries," Atticus mused, a mysterious smile playing on his lips. "I've heard it's the most enigmatic division within the Ministry of Magic." "Indeed," Ms. Bones affirmed with a nod. "The Department of Mysteries operates quite independently within the Ministry. It rarely recruits from Hogwarts, and those who work there are known as the Unspeakables. These individuals are typically specialized wizards. When they retire due to age or health, they often have family members or apprentices take their place to maintain confidentiality. They enjoy a high degree of autonomy, and the Ministry generally refrains from interfering in their work." Atticus's eyes gleamed with interest. He hadn't anticipated having acquaintances within the Department of Mysteries. Mrs. Bones led Atticus and Hagrid into the office of the Minister of Magic. The room was a spacious semicircle, and despite being underground, the 4 large windows displayed a bright, sunny day outside. Tall shelves lined one side of the room, filled with books and documents marked as top secret. Each file box was secured with a lock featuring 8 golden claws, warning of dire consequences for unauthorized access. On the opposite side, a series of gleaming decorations suggested that the current Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge, had a penchant for luxury. "Those are from Cornelius's personal collection," Ms. Bones remarked. Fudge was absent from his office. After directing Hagrid to sit on the sofa, she turned to see Atticus standing before the shelf, admiring the displayed artworks with keen interest. Compared to her demeanor outside, Ms. Bones's expression was now much softer. She smiled as she approached Atticus, introducing the items. Most are goblin-made tools, and some are antiques with a long magical history. "It seems our Minister for Magic has a taste for the extravagant," Atticus commented, nodding with a smile as he shifted his gaze from a golden mask with a distinct ancient Egyptian style. If he recalled correctly, it had been smuggled from Egypt the previous year. How it ended up in Fudge's possession was a mystery. Ms. Bones merely smiled at Atticus's remark, offering no further comment, though it was clear she didn't share Fudge's taste. Before delving into the main topic, some pleasantries were exchanged. "Although you didn't pass your tests, Susan spoke highly of your engaging Defense Against the Dark Arts practical classes. I must say, Atticus, you are both imaginative and bold. Few professors would dare to present an inferius to young wizards, but I believe it was the right decision. Hogwarts has a crucial role in preparing young wizards for the world, and in recent years, we've noticed that graduates, while still excellent, lack certain essential qualities like decisiveness, perseverance, and sharpness. This is a significant issue, yet some choose to overlook it." Was this a critique of Dumbledore or something else? Atticus maintained a modest defense, his expression calm, though his mind raced with thoughts. Ms. Bones held a high position within the Ministry of Magic and was a leading candidate for future leadership. The race for the next Minister of Magic after Fudge was heating up. Within the ministry, only Barty Crouch from the Department of International Magical Cooperation posed a significant challenge to her candidacy. However, after the truth about Sirius came to light, Barty Sr. was effectively out of the running, leaving her without a formidable competitor. "A peaceful life can indeed be addictive," Atticus Blaine mused, nodding in agreement. "It blinds some wizards to the lurking dangers." He knew that when war eventually broke out, individuals like Fudge would be of little use, serving only as obstacles. In such times, Atticus hoped that someone within the ministry would take his opinions seriously. Resorting to force and intimidation was not the path he wished to follow, as it would only lead him down the same dark road as the Dark Lord. To ensure his voice was heard, Atticus needed an ally within the ministry. Amelia Burns appeared to be a promising choice. She seemed capable of advocating for his perspective and steering clear of the pitfalls of power. End of this chapter. Chapter 329, The Value of Each Other. Atticus Blaine sought an ally within the Ministry of Magic, and the most suitable candidate seemed to be Amelia Bones. He held 3 significant advantages. The first was his role as the director of the Student Safety Office at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Even without Dumbledore, Hogwarts held a prestigious position in the wizarding world, and its faculty could be considered officials of the magical world, to some extent. Dumbledore had established this position at a level akin to that of a vice headmaster. The second advantage was Atticus Blaine's adept handling of the troubles caused by Sirius. The third, and perhaps most crucial, was the power he demonstrated when he defeated Greyback. This display of strength surpassed the Ministry of Magic's own capabilities. If not for Albus Dumbledore's presence, the entire ministry might have been thrown into chaos by the emergence of such a formidable figure in the British magical community. However, forming an alliance required mutual consent. From Atticus's perspective, Amelia Bones had shown some willingness, though she remained cautious. This was understandable, as they had never interacted before, and now Atticus stood before the ministry in a prominent manner, compelling them to acknowledge him, which naturally aroused vigilance. "Well, Amelia," Atticus addressed her by her first name at her request. "Besides being invited to the press conference and receiving honors from the Ministry of Magic, I have some personal matters to attend to. I initially planned to approach Minister Fudge." Ms. Bones blinked in surprise, a smile forming on her lips. Asking for assistance was a way to show familiarity. On the night of Greyback's demise, she had attempted to recruit Atticus into the ministry, but he had declined her offer, leading her to believe he, like Dumbledore, wished to remain uninvolved with the ministry. However, it now seemed Atticus Blaine was seeking something. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Ms. Bones offered with a smile. "You're welcome, Atticus. Even for Susan's sake, I will do my best." By mentioning Susan, a young witch Atticus hadn't paid much attention to at school, Miss Bones was appealing to personal connections. Dealing with astute individuals was indeed straightforward, and Atticus nodded inwardly. "Hagrid, tell me your trouble." What? Oh, it's not. It's Buckbeak." Hagrid, flustered with nerves, regained his composure. Due to his past expulsion from Hogwarts, he was always anxious about anything that might breach the law. Swallowing hard, he cautiously explained, "Buckbeak is a hippogriff, and there was an incident in the Forbidden Forest." "Oh, no, he caused an incident with Draco during class." "Draco?" Ms. Bones, puzzled by Hagrid's stammering, frowned and asked, "Lucius Malfoy's son? What happened to him?" Atticus glanced at the flushed Hagrid and replied casually, "A minor incident. Mr. Malfoy, in an attempt to show off, disregarded the rules in the care of magical creatures class and provoked a hippogriff named Buckbeak. As a result, he received a scratch on his arm." Noticing Miss Bones' slight frown, Atticus added, "He has recovered." On the same day, it was not a serious injury. Miss Burns's frown relaxed as she pondered for a moment, a hint of a smile appearing in her eyes. "Did Lucius make an excuse?" she asked. "The Hazardous Creatures Commission has initiated formal proceedings against Buckbeak, and there's a significant chance that the innocent creature will be executed." Atticus Blaine picked up his teacup, the red tea within shimmering like a ruby when still. He took a sip, maintaining a calm demeanor. "I know it's not easy." Miss Bones paused, while Hagrid clenched his bear-like hands tightly, perspiration beading on his forehead. "As long as, if it means sparing little Buck, I can forgo any reward." Suddenly, Miss Burns stood up from the sofa opposite. Hagrid, fearing he had upset her, was about to explain, but Atticus gestured for him to remain calm. Miss Burns swiftly moved to the assistant minister's small desk, retrieved a quill from the pen holder, and scribbled a few words on a piece of parchment. With a flick of her wand, the parchment folded itself into a paper airplane and zipped out of the office through the door crack with a whoosh. "I've sent a note to Mockridge, asking him to reassess the situation's danger. I believe they won't trouble you anymore, Hagrid," Ms. Burns said kindly as she returned to the sofa. "Is this really the end?" Hagrid looked bewildered, as this issue had been a burden for him for half a year. "One more thing, Amelia." Hagrid was still in a daze, but Atticus had already moved on. "I think you might recall. Last summer, a young wizard at Hogwarts applied for a time-turner from the Ministry of Magic for educational purposes." After a brief moment of thought, Miss Burns nodded. "Yes, I remember. I don't recall the young wizard's name, but I do remember Minerva coming to the ministry with the child's year-end exam results and professor's comments to sign Connolly's bill." "The time-turner is broken," Atticus said, pulling the damaged time-turner from his pocket and showing it to Miss Burns. "Broken?" Ms. Bones's expression turned serious. "The time-turner is a strictly controlled magical item, and each one is registered and tracked." "Yes," Atticus nodded. "The young wizard's name is Hermione Granger, a very bright and diligent witch. She can't quite remember how the time-turner broke, but it likely happened while she was escaping with Harry Potter from werewolves." "So Greyback broke it?" Miss Burns's face softened. "Yes, the culprit has been dealt with," Atticus replied without a hint of hesitation, confident in his explanation. "If necessary, he could have Greyback corroborate his story. Then it will be much easier to resolve." Ms. Burns said. "Have Hermione Granger write a statement detailing the circumstances and ask Minerva and you to sign it. After that, I'll present the statement to Connery and request he sign it. We'll then send a disclaimer to the Department of Mysteries, and that will conclude the matter. End of this chapter. Chapter 330. Bah! Unlucky Amelia deftly handled the incident that had been causing headaches for Hagrid and Hermione, showcasing her competence and the advantages of her position in front of Atticus Blaine. For a fleeting moment, Atticus considered whether he should make a trip to the Ministry of Magic. However, he quickly dismissed the thought. In a stable society, power and influence are indeed valuable, but when chaos looms, personal strength becomes more significant. Moreover, once entangled in the web of power, it's challenging to remain uninvolved, much like Amelia before him. Amelia Bones was well regarded in the magical community as an upright wizard, yet even someone of her integrity had to navigate the treacherous waters of political power to avoid being sidelined. She had to constantly bolster her position. Ah, look who it is. Just before 8 o'clock, a series of footsteps echoed outside the office door. As soon as Cornelius Fudge, the leader, opened the door, he beamed with joy upon seeing Atticus on the sofa. He strode forward with open arms. "Good morning, Minister Fudge. You look well," Atticus said, standing up to embrace Fudge lightly, a smile on his face. "Indeed, thanks to a remarkable young hero who helped the ministry solve a significant problem." Fudge winked at Atticus, his demeanor exceedingly friendly. Then, as if suddenly remembering, he turned sideways to introduce the others who had entered the office with him. "Rufus and Dolores, you met them that night. Atticus, these two are Amelia and my right-hand men. Without them, we couldn't manage the complex situations we face," Fudge said with a smile. Atticus noticed a fleeting displeasure in Amelia's eyes and immediately sensed the underlying tension. Fudge's words seemed more like pleasantries. Dolores Umbridge, the senior deputy minister of magic, had a noticeably different attitude since their last meeting, now looking at him with a simpering smile. Rufus Scrimgeour, the head of the Auror office, was part of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. However, when Amelia had received him, he hadn't brought any subordinates from this crucial department. Instead, Rufus seemed to be following Fudge's lead, which suggested he was being sidelined. Atticus had encountered Rufus 3 times, the first when he was sent to St. Mungo's, the second during the incident, and now. He understood why the Auror chief of staff was cold towards him. Rufus, who had witnessed Atticus using the Fierce Fire curse, was a man who couldn't tolerate any nonsense. Moreover, the Aurors had been tracking Greyback for years without success, only for him to be captured unexpectedly. This incident almost implied that the Aurors were ineffective. Ahem, and this. Fudge's smile faltered slightly as he gestured towards the last wizard who entered the office. The director of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, the renowned Barty Crouch. Everyone in the British magical world knows him, including you, of course, right, Atticus? Fudge's tone was laced with malice. From the order of introductions and Fudge's tone, Atticus sensed his hostility towards Barty Crouch. Crouch, a man in his 50s, was quite different from the stocky, casually dressed Fudge, who often wore a kind smile. Crouch stood with a straight back, his movements precise, and his suit immaculate. His tie was perfectly smooth, and his short black hair was meticulously styled, with a part as straight as a ruler. His narrow toothbrush mustache looked as if it had been trimmed with a slide rule. Atticus Blaine discerned a sense of indifference in Crouch's eyes as they met his own, not hostility or disgust, but a detached neutrality. This intrigued Atticus. By now, it was impossible for Barty Crouch not to be aware that the ministry was preparing to scapegoat him for Sirius's actions, effectively derailing his ambitions for advancement. Under normal circumstances, Barty Crouch would harbor significant resentment towards him. The expression on Crouch's face, however, suggested that Fudge hadn't disclosed that the idea originated from him. As Atticus's mind raced, Barty Crouch scrutinized him, his brow furrowing slightly. As a seasoned senior official at the Ministry of Magic, Crouch had encountered countless promising young wizards over the years. Yet each one, under his intense gaze, would inevitably falter, appearing nervous and unsure. Only Atticus Blaine, the director of the Hogwarts Student Security Office, seemed unfazed. Despite being in his early 20s, Atticus met Crouch's gaze with his striking lavender eyes, showing no sign of fear. There was a sharpness in his heterochromatic pupils that was both unsettling and captivating. When Connolly had informed Crouch that it was a young wizard who had defeated Greyback and his pack of werewolves, he had been skeptical. Now, however, he was nearly convinced. The person most disheartened in the room was undoubtedly Barty Crouch. 12 years ago, his son's involvement with the Death Eaters had shattered his aspirations of becoming Minister of Magic. After years of hard work, the magical community had begun to forget the scandal. Yet, unexpectedly, a political maneuver from the past had resurfaced to haunt him. In the past, Barty Crouch might have been eager to converse with this remarkable young wizard who had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. But now, he was in no mood for pleasantries, merely acknowledging Atticus with a curt nod. The individuals in the office were strong contenders for the next Minister of Magic. Having chosen to support Amelia Bones, Atticus found it prudent to maintain a certain distance from others. Thus, he returned Crouch's nod with a faint, knowing smile. The atmosphere in the room was tense. Fudge appeared slightly uncomfortable, while Amelia rose gracefully, smiling as she addressed Fudge. Atticus and I were just discussing the situation at the school, Connolly. I believe the most important news should come from you. Oh, thank you for the honor, Amelia, Fudge replied with a smile. He gestured for everyone to find a seat, then turned to Atticus with a warm expression. The Merlin First Class Medal. We urgently contacted the Medal Evaluation Office under the International Federation of Wizards. It was quite challenging, but we succeeded. This is what I promised last summer. Thank you very much, Atticus responded, feigning surprise with practiced ease. In addition, after much deliberation, the Ministry has decided to invite you to serve as a wizard on the Wizengamot trial seat, as a senior advisor to the Ministry of Magic. Of course, the bounty for Greyback and his werewolves, along with the original reward intended for Sirius, totaling a substantial number of galleons, will be awarded to you. This tangible benefit brought a genuine smile to Atticus's face. We've also secured some additional honors for you, Atticus, Fudge continued enthusiastically. Dumbledore, the honorary vice-chairman of the Anti-Dark Magic League, is the honorary chairman. Moreover, we've arranged for you to be featured in the renowned wizarding magazine, Wizard Weekly. This year's Most Charming Smile Award is yours, Atticus. I wager your photograph will be more prominent than Gilderoy Lockhart's on the cover, especially since that bothersome fraud merely stole the tale of a wizard who saved a small village from werewolves, whereas you actually vanquished them. Such a werewolf. Bah, what a shame. The smile on Atticus Blaine's face stiffened, transforming from genuine amusement to a mask of disappointment. End of this chapter. Chapter 331, Press Conference. After announcing the award for Atticus Blaine, Fudge and Blaine found themselves facing each other once more. The reporters, eager to uncover every detail of this significant news, were relentless in their pursuit. Following internal discussions, the senior officials decided to inform the magical world that in the operation to eradicate the werewolves, the Ministry of Magic was led by Cornelius Fudge and Barty Crouch, who were responsible for preliminary intelligence gathering and command work. Upon hearing this announcement, Atticus Blaine was slightly taken aback. Fudge's presence was expected, as it was a prime opportunity for him to garner public support. As for Barty Crouch, Blaine realized this was likely a form of compensation, considering the burden that would inevitably fall on his shoulders. This is a monumental victory. For too long, the wizarding world has lived under the shadow of the werewolf gang led by Greyback. There are countless tragic examples. Innocent and kind residents of our world have lost their peaceful lives due to werewolf attacks, Fudge declared passionately. The entrance hall of the Ministry of Magic was packed with reporters from renowned media outlets, both domestic and international. Amidst the constant flash of cameras, Fudge, with a flushed face, vehemently condemned Greyback for his numerous crimes against both the magical and non-magical worlds. In his fervor, it seemed as though Greyback's atrocities overshadowed even those of the mysterious dark wizard from the past. It's astonishing that the Ministry managed to keep this under wraps, Fudge boasted from the podium, while Ministry staff worked diligently to maintain order among the crowd. Mr. Weasley, busy and perspiring, took a moment to speak with Amos Diggory, who was also involved in the event's organization. "I agree with you, Arthur," Amos from the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures exclaimed. "You know, Arthur, I have many contacts in the Auror office, yet not a single one mentioned a word. I just spoke with Kingsley, and he was tight-lipped. It's incredible that they accomplished such a feat in complete silence." Amos paused, turning his attention to the stage where Atticus Blaine stood out among the middle-aged wizards, most of whom were over 40. "What do you know about that Blaine, Arthur?" "Oh, him," Mr. Weasley chuckled warmly. "Honestly, I should be surprised that a wizard managed to defeat so many werewolves, but knowing it was Atticus, it just seems fitting. In the Ministry of Magic, possessing good gossip made one quite popular, and Amos was immediately intrigued. He tugged at Mr. Weasley's robe, urging him to elaborate. "As you know, last year, Atticus saved my daughter Ginny and my youngest son Ron from the basilisk. Although Fudge claimed that Atticus was sent by the Ministry and the Hogwarts Board of Governors, there was no truth to that." "I heard Cedric mention it," Amos said eagerly. He admired how Atticus Blaine taught them defense against the dark arts. He even noted that Blaine was the only professor in recent years to leave that position unscathed. "What do you make of that, Arthur?" A small wizard resembling a ferret and clad in a navy blue robe leaned in. "Perhaps." This was Reggie Cattermole from the Magical Maintenance Service. He lowered his voice, wary of the reporters nearby. "There have been rumors for years that the position was cursed by that unnameable wizard. Except for Atticus Blaine, maybe." Cattermole's voice trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air. The conversation halted abruptly, and no one continued. The reason for the silence was the same for everyone, including Atticus Blaine. The conjecture was too sensational, almost absurd to entertain. Mr. Weasley, aware of what his colleagues were pondering, initially dismissed the idea as impossible. However, he recalled the night when his eldest son, Bill, and second son, Charlie, faced misfortune in their 5th year. Atticus Blaine, then only 16, had single-handedly repelled a formidable dark wizard of unknown origin and even blocked a disarming spell cast by an enraged Dumbledore. After all these years, the extent of his magical prowess remained a mystery. Amid the commotion, Fudge reluctantly left the stage, yielding it to Barty Crouch. "As Secretary Fudge mentioned," Mr. Crouch began grimly, "we contacted Hogwarts in advance. With the support of the Student Security Office Director, we dispatched numerous Aurors to the areas where the werewolves might flee. Ultimately, we drove them out of the Forbidden Forest. The formidable Mr. Atticus Blaine thwarted the werewolves' despicable, shameful acts, eliminating them before they could escape the Forbidden Forest and take the residents of Hogsmeade Village hostage." With a polite smile, Atticus bowed to the reporters, who gazed at him in awe. Amid the prolonged applause, a reporter called out, "Speak to us, Mr. Blaine." The journalists present, leaders in their field, found the official statements from Minister of Magic Cornelius Fudge and the Director of the International Department of Magical Cooperation rather dull. The public's interest lay in new faces, and the reporter's call was echoed by many others. Barty Crouch, visibly impatient, turned and left without acknowledging Cornelius Fudge, merely casting him an indifferent glance. "All right, I suppose I should introduce myself," Atticus began. Despite facing such a situation for the first time, he showed no signs of awkwardness. Under Fudge's redundant yet encouraging gaze, he smiled and stepped to the center of the platform. With a flick of his wand, he amplified his voice, which resonated throughout the Ministry of Magic's hall. "My name is Atticus Blaine, and like everyone here, I graduated from the greatest school of magic in the world, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. After leaving Hogwarts, I embarked on a journey to enhance my magical abilities, following in the footsteps of ancient wizards who left indelible marks on the history of magic. At the beginning of last year, I was invited to return to Hogwarts, tasked by the Ministry of Magic and the school board to investigate the rumored truth about the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets, with the opportunity to become a professor. End of this chapter. Chapter 332, Sharp Questions. Before today, Atticus Blaine had never been in the public eye. It is, therefore, understandable that in a time of peace, the news of a young, previously unknown wizards single-handedly wiping out an entire werewolf pack would send shockwaves through the magical world. Mr. Blaine. After Atticus's brief self-introduction, a female reporter with a graceful figure and burgundy curly hair, representing the prominent French publication Gargoyle Roar, raised her hand. She spoke with reverence. Minister Fudge has just announced that you will be awarded the Order of Merlin, First Class, and that the British Ministry of Magic will hire you as a senior advisor. Does this mean you will leave Hogwarts and enter politics? Without a moment's hesitation, Atticus replied with a slight smile. While serving as an official in the Ministry of Magic is indeed a noble pursuit, I prefer to remain at Hogwarts. I find it more meaningful to engage with the students, nurture their skills and intellect, and help them grow into capable adult wizards. Atticus's response was met with warm applause, and several senior ministry officials discreetly sighed in relief. If Atticus Blaine, with his formidable power and public support, had sought a position within the ministry, they would have been hard-pressed to refuse him. It would have been impossible to offer a mere token position to such a powerful wizard without causing significant upheaval. Today, Atticus experienced firsthand the challenges of dealing with the reporters that Fudge feared so much. The question from the Gargoyle Roar reporter was just the beginning. More probing questions followed, asking whether Atticus had been unofficially appointed as the next headmaster of Hogwarts, who had greater magical power between him and Dumbledore, and whether he, as a Muggle-born wizard, would advocate for the rights of half-blood wizards. A reporter from the American New York Elf even inquired about Atticus's thoughts on the imprisonment of Gilderoy Lockhart, a well-known best-selling author in the European magical community and his co-professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts the previous year. How else could he view it, other than to visit Azkaban? Mr. Blaine, this is Rita Skeeter from the Daily Prophet. Generally, the atmosphere of the press conference remained friendly. After all, the Ministry of Magic and Atticus Blaine had rid the world of a notorious werewolf gang. No one wanted to spoil the celebratory mood. However, there were exceptions. A female reporter from the Daily Prophet stood out. Her hair was styled into elaborate, stiff curls that looked particularly odd against her broad-jawed face. She wore bejeweled glasses and clutched a crocodile handbag in her plump fingers, her nails painted bright red and extending 2 inches long. At that moment, she held her hand high, and a green shorthand quill scribbled rapidly on the parchment spread across her lap. Oh no, I knew it was her. Fudge's face tensed, and his nervous mutter reached Atticus's ears. It seemed that Rita Skeeter, notorious in the magical world for her gossip and biting commentary, was about to speak. Her reputation preceded her, and as she raised her hand to ask a question, the surrounding reporters fell silent, their eyes fixed on her expectantly. Rita's grin revealed 3 large gold teeth, and it was clear she was eager to make her mark. Miss Skeeter, you may state your problem. Atticus Blaine said gently. Oh, Mr. Blaine, there's no doubt you've achieved remarkable feats. It's truly astonishing. I can't fathom how a wizard of modest fame could confront nearly 100 ferocious werewolves head-on, Rita Skeeter remarked, her lips moving swiftly. Her eyes, hidden behind bejeweled frames, flashed with a hint of intrigue. Yes, I was curious about that. So, my dedicated colleagues and I, in our relentless pursuit of truth, spoke with some Hogsmeade villagers who witnessed the events of that night. There's some peculiar talk going around, though it might just be that the Agers can't comprehend your powerful magic. Atticus maintained a patient, attentive demeanor. What kind of strange statements? With a sly smile, Rita Skeeter rose from her stool, ensuring the cameras captured her at her best. This is a serious allegation, but Mr. Blaine, it seems some believe the powerful fire magic you wielded that night is fiend fire? As the word fiend fire echoed in the antechamber of the Ministry of Magic, a chill seemed to sweep over the murmuring reporters, causing them to shrink back. In the UK, the public might not be well versed in the fiendfire curse. After all, it's a formidable spell mastered by only a select few wizards. However, journalists from France and Germany vividly recall the devastation it caused in their countries. Though not as infamous as the unforgivable curses, the fiendfire curse is also on the list of spells strictly prohibited by the Ministry of Magic worldwide. While using extraordinary means to combat werewolves isn't entirely unjustified, many reporters had gathered information but hesitated to broach the subject. Nevertheless, it remained a controversial issue, both for Atticus Blaine and the Ministry of Magic. Rita Skeeter, ever the scandal seeker, saw through this and boldly posed the question. A tense silence fell over the room, and Amelia Bones frowned. In contrast, Rufus Scrimgeour, present at the press conference, had a glint of satisfaction in his lion-like yellow eyes. He harbored a dislike for Atticus Blaine, not only because Blaine overshadowed the Aurors, but also because Scrimgeour, a seasoned crime fighter, sensed something amiss about him. He knew that a wizard adept at using fiend fire couldn't be entirely blameless. Unfortunately, his superiors chose to ignore this suspicion. Everyone leaned forward, eager for Atticus's response. They speculated on his possible explanations, either a flat denial or presenting a special order from the Ministry of Magic, both of which could embarrass him and the ministry. This was precisely Rita Skeeter's plan. Facing the expectant crowd, Atticus smiled slightly. "Before I address this question, I would like to ask you all," he began, scanning the room with a calm demeanor. "Why is the Fiendfire Curse listed as an illegal and banned spell by various countries?" The unexpected question left everyone momentarily bewildered. Even Rita Skeeter, who had posed the initial question, was taken aback, though she quickly regained her composure. "Sir, I thought we were discussing whether the magic that killed Greyback was the Fiendfire Curse, not the academic reasoning behind its ban." Atticus Blaine seemed intent on steering the conversation into murkier waters, leaving the room in suspense. Rita Skeeter pondered the issue, convinced she had deciphered Atticus Blaine's thoughts. She paid no heed to Fudge's furious glare, instead wearing a satisfied smile. "The reason the Fierce Fire Curse is considered dark magic and banned by numerous countries boils down to three main points," Atticus explained calmly, casting a glance at Rita Skeeter, who appeared determined to scrutinize the matter further. End of this chapter. Chapter 333, The Power of Fiendfire. Atticus Blaine stood before the gathered journalists and Ministry of Magic officials, his voice steady and commanding as he delved into the intricacies of Fiendfire, a formidable dark art. "There are three crucial points to understand," he began, ignoring Rita Skeeter's probing questions. "First, like many abhorrent black magics, the power of Fiendfire is heavily influenced by the violent emotions of the caster. This extreme mindset makes Fiendfire notoriously difficult to control. Once cast, it amplifies the anger within the caster, rendering it even more uncontrollable. This was a rare opportunity for those present, a chance to learn from a wizard as powerful as Atticus Blaine. His insights were invaluable, and no amount of gold galleons could match the worth of his first-hand experience. His words captivated the audience, even causing Rufus to momentarily set aside his biases to listen intently. "Building on the first point," Atticus continued, "to successfully cast Fiendfire without succumbing to its flames, one must possess exceptional control over their magic. While many wizards have the magical capacity to cast this spell, they often fall victim to its backlash due to insufficient control. Magic serves as a crucial medium for Fiendfire. The flames, imbued with the caster's violent thoughts, will voraciously consume any high-concentration magical deposits in the vicinity. This means that any life or object with magical properties is at risk of annihilation when near Fiendfire." Rita Skeeter, sensing the shift in attention, attempted to regain control of the narrative. Her smile faded as she coldly interjected. "Mr. Blaine, while your mastery of Fiendfire is impressive, it remains an extremely malevolent form of black magic." Unperturbed, Atticus continued his presentation, his wand slipping effortlessly into his palm. "Next, I will demonstrate the fire magic that vanquished Greyback," he announced, causing a ripple of shock among the senior officials standing behind him. The idea of showcasing Fiendfire in the Ministry of Magic's entrance hall, in front of international reporters, seemed preposterous. Cornelius Fudge, recalling the night when a sea of flames threatened to engulf the outskirts of Hogsmeade, was visibly alarmed. It was a display of power he had never witnessed before, reminiscent of the dark days when a certain unnamed wizard terrorized the magical world. "Wait, Atticus, you can't do this!" Fudge exclaimed, his face pale with fear. Was Atticus truly intending to flaunt his power at the ministry? Surely, he wasn't so incensed as to harm Rita Skeeter. Rufus, reacting swiftly, mirrored Atticus's movements, his wand at the ready. His expression was grim as he cast a disarming curse, the red light streaking through the air with a sharp whistle. The curse, aimed at preventing a potential catastrophe, reached Atticus in an instant. But just as the curse was about to strike, a swirling vortex of silver and blue magic materialized behind Atticus. The black abyss at its center resembled a black hole, absorbing the fierce, disarming spell. In that moment, Atticus Blaine had not only demonstrated his mastery over fiendfire, but also his unparalleled control over magic itself. The day's events would undoubtedly make headlines, but not as a scandal, rather as a testament to Atticus Blaine's extraordinary prowess. The curse was like a moth drawn to a flame, effortlessly consumed by the black hole without causing a ripple. Atticus Blaine remained unaware, smiling without looking back. His wrist movements were as graceful as a dance, conjuring nimble and enchanting canaries, their bodies crafted from flames of various hues. The tip of Atticus's staff emerged, twirling beneath the peacock-blue ceiling as hundreds watched in awe throughout the hall. These lifelike canaries, each a different color, spread their wings from one side of the hall to the other, creating the illusion of magnificent fireworks blooming overhead. "These firebirds," someone marveled, "can they actually sipe?" Indeed, the birds emitted crisp, clear calls while performing intricate aerial maneuvers. To the untrained eye, it might seem unremarkable, but those in the know understood the true wonder of it. Even with a standard fire charm, few wizards could manipulate flames into avian forms, let alone if it were truly fiendfire. A French reporter, her wine-red curls cascading down her shoulders, was captivated by the agile flame birds. Forgetting they were born of fire, she instinctively reached out. Noticing this, Atticus directed one of the birds to land gently on her hand. Gasps echoed through the hall, and some timid wizards even covered their eyes. "How does it feel?" Atticus inquired. "It's warm," the female reporter replied, absent-mindedly stroking the fiery bird's soft plumage. "I understand your point, Mr. Blaine, but are you certain this isn't the result of the flock of birds spell?" With a snap of his fingers, Atticus sent the flame canary soaring skyward. It darted like a peregrine falcon diving from great heights, colliding with a statue at the hall's edge. Boom! The statue was instantly engulfed in demonic fire, and nearby reporters fell back in shock, staring in horror as the statue melted like a snowman under a blazing sun. The female reporter, too, was struck silent with fear. In the ensuing silence, Atticus retrieved a piece of parchment from his robes and tossed it into the air, where it fluttered into Rita Skeeter's hands. "The magic I use is indeed related to fiendfire, but it cannot be defined as fiendfire. The document you hold is the application for the improvement of fiendfire that I submitted to the Experimental Spells Committee of the Ministry of Magic 2 years ago. You'll see it bears Mr. Gilbert Whymper's signature. I've altered the core of this magic. The new spell is easy to control, no longer fueled by the caster's violence and anger, nor does it seek out high-concentration magic sources to consume and strengthen itself. Even the formidable power of fiendfire is somewhat restrained. I've given this magic a new name, the Spiritual Fire Curse." Atticus smiled at the stunned reporters, tucking his wand back into his sleeve. "In other words, is there an issue with this being a legal spell, Miss Rita Skeeter?" "You're misleading the public, Blaine," Rufus Scrimger muttered through clenched teeth, his face turning a shade of blue. However, Fudge quickly silenced him with a stern look, then cast an approving glance at Atticus. Whether the license Atticus presented was genuine or not was irrelevant. Even if it were fake, it could be legitimized immediately after the press conference concluded. End of this chapter. Chapter 334. In the face of Atticus Blaine's remarkable display and the flawless spell research and improvement license, Rita Skeeter found herself at a loss. Despite her decades-long career, where she had never missed a scoop, she was clearly not ready to concede defeat. Her half-smiling expression as she returned the permit suggested she had set her sights on Atticus. "Be careful, Atticus," Amelia warned, as the grand press conference concluded. The British Ministry of Magic, as the host, had organized an elaborate luncheon. During the event, Amelia approached Atticus, who was conversing with Mr. Weasley, and cautioned him. "That woman, Rita Skeeter is a nuisance and not someone to be taken lightly. Atticus nodded slightly, casting a glance at Rita Skeeter as she navigated through the crowd, eager to uncover more inside information. A peculiar glint appeared in his eyes. Indeed, this renowned Daily Prophet journalist was exceptional. Despite the accolades, she was determined to unearth some sensational stories about him and the Ministry of Magic. Although her motives were not rooted in truth, there might be opportunities for collaboration in the future. During the luncheon, Atticus made an announcement that electrified the atmosphere. He declared his intention to divide the 10,000 galleons awarded by the Ministry of Magic for the capture of Greyback and his werewolf tribe into two parts. One portion would be donated to St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Injuries with the hope of enhancing their treatment capabilities. The other portion would go to the Hogwarts Poor Students Grant Foundation, aiding children with magical talents from modest backgrounds in realizing their dreams of becoming accomplished wizards. The annual salary of a director-level official at the Ministry of Magic, or an ordinary professor, excluding the 4 deans of Hogwarts, rarely exceeded 1,000 galleons. Even wealthy pureblood wizards like the Malfoys seldom spent such sums without expecting something in return. The following days were a time of celebration for the entire European and American magical communities. Prestigious newspapers and periodicals reported the joint effort by the British Ministry of Magic and Hogwarts in defeating Greyback. However, this was not the only topic of discussion. On the day of the press conference, in response to Rita Skeeter's probing questions, Atticus Blaine demonstrated a powerful flame spell, which became a subject of widespread conversation. While ordinary people might have been merely entertained, skilled wizards and scholars were astounded by the magical control Atticus displayed. In the academic world, the magazine Spell Innovation, a leading publication, dedicated half of its latest issue to analyzing the spell configuration process as deduced by renowned scholars. Their conclusion was that, excluding Albus Dumbledore, who had not published research in recent years, Atticus Blaine's level of spell innovation was unparalleled in the magical world. Suddenly, the notion that Atticus Blaine's magical prowess had surpassed that of the venerable Albus Dumbledore gained traction. Dumbledore's silence on the matter only fueled the speculation. Atticus experienced the consequences of fame firsthand. Within just a few days, the temporary residence arranged by the Ministry of Magic was inundated with letters from around the globe. The constant arrival of owls even prompted an investigation by the Muggle Animal Protection Department. Among the letters, many were expressions of pure admiration. Some sought to discuss innovative magical spells with Atticus Blaine, others wished to make gestures of camaraderie, and some had motives they preferred to keep private. As the honorary vice-chairman of the organization, the Anti-Dark Arts Alliance sent 5 official letters to the British Ministry of Magic within 3 days, urging Atticus to fulfill his obligations and attend the annual Defense Against the Dark Arts Knowledge Forum in Munich. Wizard Weekly had never managed to secure an in-person interview with Atticus, so they resorted to using photos taken by reporters during a press conference, featuring his most charming smile on the magazine's cover. Overnight, Atticus Blaine's name became widely recognized. The Daily Prophet, after learning from his former classmates that Atticus was an orphan who grew up in an orphanage and graduated from Hogwarts with the help of a school bursary, highlighted his generous donations, further elevating his reputation. Some well-meaning individuals even suggested that Atticus be considered for the position of the next Minister of Magic after Fudge. However, this suggestion was more of a whimsical notion. Within the British Ministry of Magic, the atmosphere remained calm, and even Fudge, who was always protective of his position, did not take it seriously. Apart from the exception of Dumbledore, it was not easy for an outsider who had never worked in the ministry to penetrate this exclusive circle. In times of equilibrium, public opinion alone was insufficient. The support of a pure-blood wizarding family was essential. Many in the wizarding world believed that half-blood and muggle-born wizards had become the mainstream, as the ministry was filled with officials of ordinary origins. However, the truly astute knew that many things remained unchanged. The upper echelons of the ministry were still dominated by members of prestigious families, and the sacred purebloods, though less visible, continued to influence the daily lives of ordinary wizards from behind the scenes. Another challenge for Atticus was the surge of magical item factories, hoping he would endorse their products. Behind these wizarding world giants stood pureblood families with vested interests and connections within the ministry. Companies like Mrs. Skoll's all-purpose magical stain remover, Butterbeer, Cornflowers, Comet Trading, Sweeping Broom Co., Ltd., the Restructured Universe Broom Co., Ltd., and Nimbus Racing Broom all sought his endorsement. They sent messages through the ministry, hoping to strike a deal. While accepting these offers could have made Atticus wealthy, he declined them all, viewing them as distractions. For Atticus, magic remained paramount. To avoid further harassment, Atticus secluded himself in a hotel room in London, booked by the ministry to host VIPs, and did not leave for 5 days. During this time, he focused on one task, responding to letters. Although many were trivial, a significant number required his attention. Meanwhile, Fudge, who had been Minister of Magic for over a decade, experienced unprecedented admiration. Wherever he went, people congratulated him on the ministry's achievements, further boosting his esteem. Atticus Blaine had become an invaluable asset to the Ministry of Magic, a fact well known among its senior officials. Without Atticus, they would still be entangled in the aftermath of Sirius Black's escape from Azkaban and the impending revelation of the true culprit behind the Potter's murder. It was, in fact, Peter Pettigrew who was guilty, while Sirius Black was innocent of these two monumental scandals. Previously, Fudge believed that the reward he had given Atticus was sufficient compensation for his contributions, perhaps even overly generous. However, as he observed the ministry's approval ratings soar, Fudge realized that his debt to Atticus was far from settled. End of this chapter. Chapter 335, The Visit. Atticus Blaine employed a bit of sleight of hand as he left the hotel where he had been staying. He altered his appearance, aiming to avoid unnecessary trouble. Although he hadn't ventured out of his room in recent days, the letters and various newspapers delivered promptly each morning kept him informed of the significant stir he had caused in the magical world. To be honest, Atticus never aspired to become a celebrity. He preferred the ease of living in the shadows. However, since that fateful night by the seaside, after destroying the cave where Voldemort had hidden the Horcrux, he realized something crucial. If Voldemort were to return to the wizarding world and attempt to wreak havoc once more, it would be a mere fantasy to think he could remain uninvolved. Atticus couldn't bear to witness the tragic deaths of innocent wizards and muggles, reminiscent of the ghouls in the lake. Is Voldemort terrifying? For ordinary people, the answer is obvious. But for Atticus or Dumbledore, the answer is not fear, but rather the challenge he presents. Once the conflict resumes, it could easily escalate into a prolonged war. The outcome wouldn't be determined by a single duel, but by a confrontation between two or more massive factions. On one side, led by Voldemort, are the radical families within the pureblood wizarding community and dark creature groups dissatisfied with the current wizarding order. On the other side, represented by Dumbledore, are those who hope for a peaceful transformation of the magical world. Additionally, with the current Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge, as their spokesperson, the Conservatives wish to maintain the status quo and reject both change and a return to the Middle Ages. As these three forces clash, Atticus must ensure his independent voice is heard, lest he become merely a super thug for Dumbledore or the Ministry of Magic. To achieve this, he must make certain sacrifices. St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries is not far from the Ministry of Magic. Unlike the ministry, it is not built underground, as that would be unhygienic. Many patients require full sunlight, and a mere glimpse of sunshine through a window wouldn't suffice. However, in terms of entrance style, St. Mungo's and the Ministry of Magic are similar. St. Mungo's Hospital is situated on a Muggle commercial street in downtown London. The street is lined with Muggle clothing stores and boutiques, resulting in considerable foot traffic. It's strange, the rent here isn't cheap, yet this place never opens. A Muggle woman carrying a large bag remarked as she passed behind Atticus. Despite his altered appearance, Atticus exuded a unique aura that caught her attention, prompting her to comment on the shop he was observing. In front of Atticus stood an old-fashioned red brick department store named Tao Tao Co. Limited. Its dilapidated and deserted appearance mirrored the telephone booth at the Ministry of Magic's entrance. The window displayed a few cracked mannequins, wigs askew, dressed in outfits from at least a decade ago. A large, closed for renovation sign hung over the dusty deadbolt. Although Atticus knew the location of St. Mungo's, he had never visited it before. His potion skills were exceptional, and he had always managed to treat any injuries sustained during his missions in the underground world. After surveying the scene and contemplating for a moment, Atticus leaned in close to the ugliest mannequin. "Well, I'm Atticus Blaine from Hogwarts, and I'm here to visit my students," he announced. Atticus Blaine and his colleagues. The mannequin in the window nodded slightly, gesturing with its fingers intertwined. Instantly, Atticus noticed a shift in the space before him as an invisible door materialized in his field of vision. Beyond it lay a bustling street, and the waiting room of St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies was no less chaotic. Patients queued up, emitting peculiar sounds. Atticus observed a witch with a head full of wild hair, who seemed to have botched a body transfiguration spell. Her face was square and wide, and she exhaled steam while emitting shrill whistles. The front page of the Daily Prophet she used to fan herself bore a photo of Atticus from a recent press conference. The people here were either enduring pain or fidgeting impatiently, paying no mind to the curious gaze of an ordinary-looking wizard. At the front of the line was the information desk, where a plump blonde witch sat. She was disinclined to answer patient inquiries, instead pointing repeatedly to a large instruction board beside her, all while clutching the latest issue of Wizard Weekly. During her idle moments, she would gaze dreamily at the cover, which featured a young wizard with soft features and an upright posture. Atticus shuddered and quickly averted his eyes. He didn't inquire about Draco Malfoy's ward, but instead glanced at the guideboard, which indicated he should head to the spell damage department on the 5th floor. Following a staggering patient, Atticus exited the waiting room and traversed a narrow corridor adorned with portraits of renowned healers. Among them, he spotted a portrait of Adele Foley. From the ceiling, crystal bubbles resembling soap bubbles floated, each containing a lit candle. The therapist's offices on either side were bustling with unfortunate wizards coming and going. As Atticus passed a door, a yellow stench wafted out, accompanied by faint wailing from behind the closed door. Reflecting on his past, Atticus realized that, aside from his time in an orphanage, he hadn't set foot in a hospital in over a decade, excluding the school infirmary. By the time he reached the 5th floor, Atticus had already sensed Draco's magical presence amidst the chaotic magical environment. Draco was in a ward at the end of the long corridor, just separated from the tumult outside by a grand golden wooden door. A middle-aged wizard with a large belly was flipping through the day's Daily Prophet. Among pure-blood wizarding families, the Malfoys were preeminent. Lucius Malfoy would never allow Draco to be surrounded by what he considered inferior people. It was certain that Draco was attended by the finest team of healers at St. Mungo's. "Sorry to bother you," Atticus said, tapping on the wooden table in front of the middle-aged wizard. The man, lowering his newspaper, met Atticus's polite gaze with empty, confused eyes. "I'm here to visit Draco Malfoy. Could you please open the door?" "Oh." The middle-aged wizard hastily rose to open the door, but as his hand touched the lock, he paused, turning to scrutinize Atticus with suspicion. "Have you made an appointment and obtained prior permission, sir? If not, according to the rules, I cannot let you in." "Ah, what a pity," Atticus replied with a smile. "I just had a spontaneous idea and didn't arrange it in advance. Well, could you please convey a message for me? Just say that I am a professor at that child's school. Yes, I personally taught him the levitation charm. I believe he will allow me entry," Atticus Blaine asserted confidently. The middle-aged security wizard eyed Atticus with suspicion, silently questioning the claim. However, his demeanor shifted as he suddenly widened his eyes in excitement. He waved a newspaper enthusiastically in Atticus's direction. "Professors at the school. Hogwarts, you mean? Surely you know Mr. Atticus Blaine. He's quite famous, isn't he? I hope I'm not being too forward, but could you possibly get his autograph for me? I wrote to him 3 days ago and haven't received a reply yet. Oh, how I miss the days when Lockhart was around. He never kept me waiting for more than a day. End of this chapter. Chapter 336, The Unpretentious Rich Man. During his school days, it wasn't uncommon for Atticus Blaine's office door to be stuffed with letters from enthusiastic young witches. However, he had never experienced a middle-aged man expressing admiration for him face to face. In the midst of their conversation, Atticus learned that the wizard's name was Anison Cowan. Anison had always dreamed of becoming an auror to combat the forces of darkness. Unfortunately, during his time at Hogwarts, Anison failed to earn even 2 Newt's certificates, making it impossible for him to join the Ministry of Magic. As a result, he ended up working at St. Mungo's, merely guarding the entrance. He continued his chatter until Atticus agreed to help him obtain an autograph. "I'm going to report to you, sir. Please take this time to register your personal information," Anison said with a shrug, adding, "You know how those noble figures dislike any surprises." He gestured towards the large notebook on the table and the quill in the inkwell, then slipped through the door, muttering as he left, "Oh, the Malfoys, they're a tough bunch, always so stern." Atticus chuckled, imagining how irritated Lucius Malfoy must have been Rico was under the imperious curse for so long. Anison returned quickly. Atticus had just finished filling in his name and the details of the patients he intended to visit in the registration book when the golden door creaked open, and Anison squeezed out again. Behind him, Lucius Malfoy emerged, holding the self-rebounding door panel. "This is the—" Anison began, but the back and forth seemed to have drained him. He struggled to maintain composure in front of Lucius Malfoy, who wore a predictably gloomy expression. Yet, his light gray eyes betrayed a hint of surprise and caution. Before Lucius could speak, Atticus interjected, "Let's talk inside, Mr. Malfoy. I don't want to cause a scene here." The familiar voice and tone immediately reassured Lucius that the stranger before him was no imposter. Considering Atticus Blaine's recent prominence in the wizarding world, Lucius quickly grasped his intentions. "Come in," Lucius said, pursing his dry lips and inviting Atticus into the VIP area. Though separated by just a door, the environment inside was noticeably quieter. The floor tiles and walls were painted in softer hues, the air was filled with a refreshing fragrance, and the aisles were adorned with various exquisite bonsai. As they walked through a lavish circular lounge, they refrained from discussing anything until they reached a wooden door inlaid with gold patterns. "Come in," Lucius gestured, pushing the door open. As the room unfolded before him, Atticus realized the extent of the opulence that characterized these pure-blood wizard families. The room was as large as Dumbledore's office, expanded by the no-trace stretching curse. The dome, adorned with artistic patterns, featured 2 chandeliers made of thousands of pure white crystals, casting a brilliant light in the sunlit room. The velvet carpet underfoot was soft, and the exquisite oil paintings on the walls were far from mere graffiti. On one side of the room, a fireplace carved with mermaid and Vela figures emitted a gentle warmth, fueled by sandalwood rather than ordinary pine, filling the air with a refreshing aroma. Sinful rich man, Atticus thought, taking in the extravagant surroundings. Atticus Blaine returned to the opulent room, reminiscent of a grand palace, and sighed with a mix of emotions. On the large bed by the window, Draco sat up, his face alight with excitement. He seemed eager to rise and greet Professor Blaine, but Narcissa Malfoy, his mother, gently restrained him. "How are you feeling, Draco?" Atticus asked as he walked past Lucius, ascending the steps to Draco's bed. He nodded to Narcissa and smiled warmly at Draco. Among the 3 unforgivable curses, the Imperious Curse is perhaps the least damaging in terms of after-effects, despite its potential for control. During Voldemort's reign of terror, many wizards who resisted him fell under its influence. Fortunately, the curse left no lasting harm, which is why Atticus had taken the risk of delaying Draco's rescue. Draco's complexion was healthy, no longer pale and confused, though a hint of uncertainty lingered in his eyes. "I didn't expect you to visit me. I'm feeling quite well, Professor Blaine," Draco grinned. "The therapists at St. Mungo's are clearly more skilled than those at our humble school hospital. My parents spared no expense." At the mention of Peter, Draco shivered with fear. Relax, darling, Narcissa soothed, wrapping her arms around Draco's head and gently patting his back. Don't be afraid, you're safe now, and your father and I promise that the vile person who dared to harm you will pay dearly. Lucius stood by Draco's bed, his fists clenched, nodding in agreement. I'm fine, Mom, Draco protested, feeling a bit embarrassed by his mother's fussing in front of Professor Blaine. He took a few deep breaths, pushed his mother away gently, and smiled. Some memories are still hazy. The therapists at St. Mungo's advised not to interfere, as they'll return on their own. That's correct, Atticus nodded. This isn't a result of the Imperious curse. I suspect Peter attempted to erase your memories of him, but his memory magic was clumsy and ineffective. As you stabilize, those memories will gradually resurface. With Atticus's reassurance, Draco and his parents felt a wave of relief. Despite the ward's luxury, Draco's confinement made it feel like a prison. His only solace was reading the latest magazines and newspapers, which had recently filled him with excitement. I heard you defeated Greyback and nearly 100 of his followers, Professor. If you were headmaster of Hogwarts, you'd surely surpass Dumbledore. My dad almost managed to oust him last year. Draco! Lucius interrupted sternly before Atticus could respond. That's not your concern. Draco quickly subdued his smile, looking chastened, but soon turned to Atticus with questions about the events at school during his time under control. Most of those memories were still unclear. Atticus drew his wand, and with a flick, an ottoman by the fireplace sprang to life, hopping over to support him. Actually, there's nothing much to worry about, Atticus said, sitting down comfortably and crossing his legs. He recounted the happenings at Hogwarts with a smile. Oh, just a bunch of cowardly, incompetent folks. I'll show them. 10 minutes later, as Atticus finished recounting Draco's experiences in Slytherin, the room was filled with a sense of camaraderie and understanding. During that time, Draco exclaimed in frustration, What gives people like Daphne, Theodore, and Millicent the nerve to keep pushing me away? Now that Draco had calmed down, Atticus Blaine had no desire to delve into the conflicts among the students. Instead, he shifted his gaze to the Malfoys, who were maintaining an air of extreme composure, and smiled. So, regarding the secrets behind Draco's attack, I trust that Connolly has appointed the appropriate personnel to explain everything to you, correct? End of this chapter. Chapter 337, Confession. The Ministry of Magic was exceptionally secretive this time. Amelia and Cornelius issued a strict gag order to every Auror present that night. Neither the general public in the magical world nor journalists from the news media received any information. However, the Malfoy family was clearly aware of the situation. Draco had been under Peter Pettigrew's control through the Imperious curse for several months. If Cornelius hadn't personally intervened, the Malfoys would have stormed Hogwarts long ago. In fact, Lucius and Narcissa already knew that Sirius was not the murderer of the Potters. They weren't alone. Many others knew as well. These individuals were Death Eaters, highly regarded by Voldemort. During the power struggle between Voldemort and Dumbledore, they were aware of the spies their master had planted in Dumbledore's camp. After Voldemort's fall, Sirius Black was accused, which they found absurd. However, at that time, Voldemort had fallen, and they were all wizards publicly denying any association with him. For their own safety, no one pointed out Barty Crouch's mistake. Last July, after Sirius escaped from Azkaban, the Malfoys privately discussed the improbability of Sirius killing Harry Potter. However, they couldn't speculate on the specific reason for his escape because they were unaware that their former comrade-in-arms, Peter Pettigrew, was still alive. The world is unpredictable, and who would have thought that Draco would be caught in the conflict between Sirius and Pettigrew? Silence was the answer. Atticus Blaine pondered for a moment, observing Lucius, whose eyes twitched with a mix of emotions, exuding an awkward aura of superiority. Regardless, Draco is a young wizard at Hogwarts. He was controlled by Peter, and the school bears an undeniable responsibility. I apologize. The treatment expenses for Draco, Goyle, and Crabbe in the opposite ward at St. Mungo's will be covered by Hogwarts. Before coming here, I have already discussed this matter with Headmaster Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall, and they will ensure the school board approves this resolution. The Malfoys exchanged glances without expressing any opinion. Atticus didn't expect his words to bring a smile to the Malfoys' faces. Although hiring the best team of healers at St. Mungo's and the current luxurious ward costs thousands of galleons daily, this amount is merely a drop in the ocean for the Malfoy family, hardly worth mentioning. According to Lucius' own wishes, only Dumbledore's resignation could quell his anger. But Lucius knew the situation was far more complex. If Dumbledore or Atticus Blaine had to pay the price for their oversight, what about the Ministry of Magic's responsibility? Should Cornelius Fudge and Barty Crouch be ousted too? The idea was laughable. Lucius knew he lacked the power to achieve this, and even Arthur Weasley, a long-standing employee with connections in the Ministry, couldn't lose his temper, let alone challenge the Ministry's leadership. Even if it were for him, the two high-ranking officials wouldn't allow it. Lucius and Narcissa didn't care about Hogwarts compensation. That was their business. However, Atticus, resenting Hogwarts, still needed to demonstrate the school's stance. "It seems this doesn't satisfy you," Atticus said, his fingers interlaced on his lower abdomen, while the Malfoys stood before him with livid faces. To an outsider, it might have appeared as though they were the ones apologizing to Atticus. He continued calmly, "If you have any requests, within a reasonable range, please let me know." The Malfoys looked at him, considering their next move. They looked at each other again, and this time, there was finally a spark in their intertwined gazes. "If you can." The last time I saw Atticus Blaine was at the Leaky Cauldron during the summer vacation last year. At that time, Narcissa was still discussing her husband's hidden and fearful demeanor when facing Atticus Blaine and his subsequent strange behavior. She was puzzled by his actions, but she finally understood why her husband behaved that way. Besides the great Dark Lord and the enigmatic Dumbledore, this young wizard, with a terrifying intensity in his eyes, was a formidable force rarely seen in the entire European magical world. Narcissa Malfoy, Lucius Malfoy's wife and a member of a renowned family, reflected on the past. Among the former Death Eaters and the members of the Order of the Phoenix, who were once deadly enemies, Narcissa could not find anyone with the magical prowess to rival Atticus Blaine. His ruthless suppression of Greyback's extremist faction further demonstrated that Atticus was a wizard who disregarded the law and was merciless. Therefore, when they met again, she was visibly restrained and uneasy in his presence. "We hope to have your support, regarding the matter of Peter Pettigrew," Narcissa said, her back to Draco, her beautiful face twisted with determination. Atticus nodded knowingly, and then fell silent. Draco's mother had previously expressed her desire for Peter to pay with his life for harming Draco, but she knew it wasn't a simple task. The death penalty in wizarding law was typically reserved for nonconformists. In a time of peace, it was challenging to persuade the Wizengamot to execute Peter, even though Narcissa insisted on his death. She understood that Peter would likely only receive a life sentence. Atticus, now a member of the Wizengamot Tribunal and a prominent figure in the magical world, could potentially sway the decision if he openly supported the death penalty for Peter, especially with the influence of the Malfoy family. However, Atticus was reluctant to tarnish his reputation. "About this." After a brief pause, Atticus nodded, surprising the Malfoys. "I'll handle it, but in my own way, understand?" His gaze made Lucius shiver. Realizing that Atticus might not advocate for Peter's execution, but would ensure his demise. "As long as that despicable bastard is punished," Lucius gritted his teeth and whispered. Draco blinked in confusion, not comprehending what Professor Blaine and his parents were discussing. Could it be that Peter might be released? Before Draco could process it, he saw Professor Blaine rise from his chair and impulsively blurted out, "May I make a request, Professor?" After receiving a few surprised looks, Draco hesitated before continuing. "If it's possible, I'd like to learn magic from you." Professor Blaine didn't immediately refuse. His gentle eyes gave Draco courage, and his tone became more confident. "That Peter Pettigrew, he took control of me, Crabbe, and Goyle at the Owl Hut. I thought, if I had the ability to deal with him—" "Draco," Narcissa interjected sternly, "you can't handle Peter Pettigrew. You don't know what kind of person he is." Seeing Draco silenced by his mother's authority, Atticus pondered for a moment before responding. "Well, I understand what you mean, Draco. I need to think about it. and I'll give you an answer when you return to Hogwarts. Anyway, Lucius escorted Atticus out of the ward and stood at the door. Lucius, who hadn't spoken softly in years, lowered his head and said quietly, "I want to express my gratitude to you, Mr. Blaine. I had only hoped you could help find the Golden Viper, but I didn't expect you to resolve the crisis for Malfoy at its root. I mean, dealing with Greyback and that bunch of filthy brutes." Atticus Blaine chuckled softly, a sound filled with unspoken meaning. He then turned to leave, saying, "Peter Pettigrew, I'll keep an eye on you." End of this chapter. Chapter 338, Future Plans. Atticus Blaine, having left the VIP area, descended the stairs slowly, his thoughts still lingering on the Malfoy family. The couple had a notorious reputation in the wizarding world. After stepping down, Lucius had spent a considerable amount of gold to avoid legal repercussions, a fact well known among the upper echelons of the magical community. They were staunch advocates of pure-blood supremacy, and it was predictable what choices they would make if their former master, the Return of the King, came to pass. Unfortunately, that notebook would create an irreparable rift between master and servant. Lucius Malfoy was a shrewd man. He likely realized the notebook was not ordinary and had taken precautions to ensure Draco had an escape route. After all, Voldemort was notorious for eliminating threats completely. Atticus didn't mind extending some goodwill to the Malfoy family. He needed to plant a seed within the Death Eaters. As he reached the second floor, Atticus noticed the biological harm section sign hanging on the wall and entered the corridor. The atmosphere here was much more somber. Most of the wards echoed with cries of pain, and therapists in green uniforms hurried back and forth, their faces etched with anxiety. Atticus glanced at the copper-framed cards hanging by the doors. At the end of the corridor, he found a sign that read, "Dangerous." Remus Lupin Ward, Severe Bite, Attending Healer, Hippocrate Smike, Trainee Therapist, Augustus Pye. Atticus had expected Auror guards, but Remus was alone in the room. Compared to Draco's ward, this place seemed more ordinary. The small ward contained 3 beds, but only Remus Lupin occupied the one by the window. The other 2 beds were empty, with neatly folded women's pajamas on the middle bed's bedside table. Remus was swathed in blood-stained bandages, only his eyes visible as he stared at the Daily Prophet on his lap, resembling a newly unearthed mummy. "Good morning, Atticus," Remus greeted, waving his arm like a stick, his tone relaxed. "I was wondering yesterday when you'd find time to visit me. After all, you're quite the sensation right now. Personally, I prefer not to cause a stir wherever I go, so I have to change my appearance when I need to be in public," Atticus replied with a smile, striding over to Remus's hospital bed. He noticed a half-eaten fruit basket on the bedside cabinet. "Oh," Atticus raised an eyebrow in surprise. "I just came from Draco's ward and realized I should have brought some flowers. No wonder Draco's mother looked so pale when she saw me." "I don't think it's because you forgot the flowers," Remus chuckled, lightening the somber mood. Atticus remained standing in front of Remus's bed and asked, "So how are you feeling, Remus?" "It couldn't be worse, could it?" Remus shrugged, though the movement tugged at his wounds, causing the bandages on his cheeks to wrinkle. "I'm already a werewolf, and that won't change. The problem is the high concentration of wolf's poison in my wounds, which hinders healing. I need to take small doses of wolf's poison daily to manage it." Mungo's therapist said this might continue for a while. "That's unfortunate," Atticus frowned slightly, scratching his head in concern. "What about defense against the dark arts? The students at school are waiting for you to recover." "Atticus," Remus said, his expression hidden by gauze, but Atticus was sure he was smiling helplessly. "You and I both know it's impossible for me to return to that school." "To teach, isn't it?" Atticus Blaine smiled cheerfully. "Never mind, just kidding." It was clear to everyone that Remus returning to Hogwarts to teach was out of the question. The primary reason he had approached Dumbledore about becoming the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor was to help capture Sirius. But now, with Sirius proven innocent and Peter under control, it was time for Remus to step back. While being a professor at Hogwarts could provide a respectable life, Remus understood that it wasn't a long-term option for him. The inherent danger he posed couldn't be ignored. and if his true identity were ever revealed to the parents of the young wizards, it would undoubtedly bring significant criticism to both Hogwarts and Dumbledore. Even Atticus could be implicated. Imagine the scandal. The director of the Hogwarts Student Safety Office, a recipient of the Order of Merlin First Class, a Wizengamot attendant wizard, a senior advisor to the Ministry of Magic, and the hero who dismantled the Greyback werewolf gang, all turning a blind eye to the werewolf in their midst. What would the magical community think if such news were to spread? In reality, Remus knew he couldn't live without the support of St. Mungo's for a while. "That's a good thing, Remus," Atticus said calmly, noticing Remus's slight disappointment. "At least you're safe now. Think of Gilderoy Lockhart. His fate is much worse than yours." Remus was momentarily taken aback, then understood. "You mean, isn't it just a rumor that Voldemort cursed the Defense Against the Dark Arts position?" Atticus nodded. "It's a powerful curse, and not easy to defend against." Seeing Remus's confusion, he added, "Last year, I used a little method to transfer the curse's effects." Remus nodded, feeling a bit of the gloom lift from his heart. However, he suddenly recalled that when Atticus had persuaded him to apply for the professor position last summer, he hadn't mentioned this method. It seemed Atticus still harbored some resentment for Remus revealing his identity as the Golden Viper to Dumbledore, using this opportunity to play a prank. Remus's mouth twitched at the memory. At the time, he had told Atticus, "You are a good man." In comparison to the Golden Viper, Remus realized he was still quite naive. Atticus likely guessed what Remus was thinking from the look in his eyes, but he remained unfazed, showing no embarrassment at having his prank exposed. "Speaking of which, what are your plans for life after recovery?" This was a pressing and genuine concern. With Sirius's name cleared, Peter facing a lifetime with the Dementors, and Harry's safety assured, everything seemed perfect. Yet, Remus's life had to continue. During his days in bed, he had pondered his future, but remained uncertain. Eliminating Greyback and his gang wouldn't erase the prejudice against those unfortunate enough to become werewolves. In the magical world, there was still no place for werewolves to thrive. "I have thought about it," Remus said, his mood relatively calm. After all, his living conditions had been this way for over a decade. His time at Hogwarts had been like a holiday, and now that it was over, he had to return to the harsh realities of life. "I'm planning to move in with Sirius for a while after I leave the hospital. I'll try to find a job that accepts werewolves." Despite his words, Remus held little hope. With a sigh, he added, "If no one will hire me, I'll have to return to the old ways, back to the underground world, and continue dealing in herbs and potion ingredients. At least the Ministry of Magic has little control there, and I won't need to navigate through I'm sorry. It seems like there might be a misunderstanding or an incomplete text. Could you please provide the full text or more context so I can assist you in improving it?" Chapter 339. To be honest, considering the humiliation Remus has endured, it's not hard to understand why so many werewolves are willing to follow Greyback in his malevolent pursuits. Even in the entrance hall of the Ministry of Magic, there stands a fountain that exudes a discriminatory aura. This alone highlights the severe prejudice and oppression that half-beasts and intelligent magical creatures face in the wizarding world. Many wizards, who were accidentally bitten and transformed into werewolves, initially adhered to their moral principles. However, the harsh reality continually battered their spirits and tormented their nerves. Not everyone possesses the steadfastness of faith that Remus does. "How?" Both Atticus Blaine and Remus fell silent. At that moment, the door of the ward creaked open, and a cheerful voice filled the room. "Did I interrupt my colleagues catching up?" Tonks, with her bright pink hair, entered with a radiant smile. She seemed unsurprised by Atticus's presence, carefully balancing a pile of toasted bread slices, along with dinner plates of sausage and pie. Atticus immediately realized who owned the lady's pajamas draped over the headboard of the hospital bed. He had assumed they belonged to a recently discharged patient. He watched as Tonks passed by him and sat naturally on the edge of Remus's bed, her mouth agape in surprise. Tonks seemed quite accustomed to this routine, completely ignoring her old classmate and the new superstar Atticus, standing nearby. She placed the dinner plate behind the bed, took a pillow, and positioned it behind Remus to make him more comfortable. "It's nice to wear a bandage sometimes. It lets you skip the step of tying a napkin," Tonks said cheerfully. "Today's pie has a unique flavor, Remus. It's filled with lentils. Would you like to try it?" Ahem. At that moment, Remus was immensely grateful that his face was obscured by layers of bandages. Otherwise, he wouldn't have known how to express his "I don't understand, but I'm shocked" look when facing Atticus. "I'm not too hungry, Nymphadora. Tonks, I've been lying in bed and not exercising much." "Okay, then 2 slices of grilled sausage," Tonks replied happily. She pointed her wand, which slipped out of her cuff at the plate, and the grilled sausages neatly transformed into a stack of sausage slices. She pinched 2 pieces with her fingers and, without hesitation, stuffed them into Remus's mouth. "Actually," Atticus restrained his amused expression and said abruptly, "I came here in a hurry this morning and didn't have breakfast. Turn left in the waiting room on the 1st floor, go through the red wooden door, and walk forward 50 feet to the restaurant, Atticus, Embark. You just donated a large sum of gold to St. Mungo's. I believe if you mention your name, they'll give you something to eat." "No thanks, I'm full," Atticus replied, his expression crestfallen. Tonks giggled. "Just kidding with you, Atticus. Here, have some bread." Although the bread was delicious, Atticus found it a bit chewy. Initially, he felt a sense of obligation towards Remus, seeing him so gravely injured. However, the current situation quickly dispelled any lingering guilt. The Ministry of Magic ordered Tonks to stay. Remus, who had been struggling for words, finally blurted out, "I know the truth about Sirius and Peter, and the Ministry doesn't want to expose this matter immediately. So they simply let Tonks watch over me. The Greyback incident has pushed werewolves into the spotlight, and many residents who have been harmed by werewolves have come forward. I happen to be an uncontrolled werewolf." "You didn't hurt anyone, Remus." Tonks interrupted Remus's explanation with displeasure. "The Ministry put me here to protect you, not to spy on you." A ray of sunlight streamed through the glass window, casting a warm glow over the room, on Tonks's heart-shaped fair face. She stared at Remus with her sparkling black eyes. "Actually, Remus, I don't think you should be troubled by your werewolf status. Not everyone cares about it. To be honest, I think you're very brave. If I had gone through what you did, I might already be in Azkaban." The room fell silent. Tonks seemed to be waiting for a response from Remus, but he suddenly became interested in a chirping sparrow perched on the window and remained silent. Seeing this, Tonks sighed softly, stood up, and picked up the plate with a heavy heart. She walked towards the door with her head down, while Atticus Blaine quickly stepped aside to make way for her. "Right." The door was ajar, and Tonks seemed to suddenly remember there was another old classmate in the room. She turned her head, shrugged, and said, "I don't know how you sneaked in without causing a commotion, Atticus, but there's a guy named Annison outside holding a book in the waiting room on the 1st floor, asking everywhere if he's seen Atticus Blaine." With a click, the door closed, leaving only the 2 of them in the ward again. Tsk-tsk. Atticus finally dared to make his presence known. He shook his head and sighed. "You're doomed, Remus. I know Tonks. She may seem quirky, but she has a persistent personality. She won't easily give up on her decisions." "I think you're misunderstanding something, Atticus." Remus finally looked back, trying hard to hide his loneliness, though there was an indelible heaviness in his voice. "It's just been me and Tonks in this ward these days. To pass the time, I told her about my days at Hogwarts with Harry's father, Sirius, and the traitor Peter. The absurd things I went through, and how I survived outside. Tonks is a very kind girl. She has sympathy for me, that's all." "Of course it is." Atticus's jewel-like lavender eyes twinkled with a smile. "I didn't say anything, did I?" Remus took a deep breath, realizing he had fallen into Atticus's trap again. He pretended to be calm and changed the subject. "Speaking of which, Sirius and Peter, what is the Ministry of Magic going to do with them?" Remus changed the topic rather abruptly, and Atticus knew what was on his mind. He genuinely believed Tonks needed to think about it, so he took advantage of the situation. "Greyback's incident has pushed the Ministry of Magic's reputation to its peak. In 2 days, the Ministry will first announce that they have captured the fugitive Sirius Black and are currently interrogating him about how he escaped from Azkaban. Afterward, They'll tell the public that some critical information came out of Sirius's mouth, which the Ministry of Magic is verifying, and finally, they'll put Peter on trial, probably in another half a month. Remus nodded, relieved about Sirius. But as he was about to ask Atticus about Harry's situation, he noticed Atticus reaching into his pocket, searching for something. A moment later, a money bag appeared in Atticus's hand. "If you want to help pay for my treatment, you don't have to, Atticus." Remus smiled. "Tonks told me that the Ministry of Magic has covered the bill for my injuries." Pat. Atticus tossed the purse directly onto Remus's lap. Feeling its heavy weight, Remus, despite his pain, held back and stared at Atticus in confusion. "I think you haven't forgotten the contract we signed, have you?" "Contract?" Remus froze for a moment, and then something suddenly clicked in his mind. During the summer vacation last year, he had indeed signed a magical contract with Atticus. At that time, they agreed to cooperate in capturing Sirius Black. Yes. Fudge kept his promise. He sent me this bounty along with Greyback's bounty. As you know, Greyback's portion was donated to Hogwarts and St. Mungo's, and Sirius's paycheck belongs to both of us, so. Remus gazed blankly at the purse resting on his lap. Atticus Blaine smiled warmly and said, "Mr. Golden Viper never breaks his promises, Remus. These 10,000 galleons are yours now." End of this chapter. Atticus Blaine, who had recently risen to fame, found himself overwhelmed with endless invitations to banquets and symposiums in the wizarding world. Meanwhile, life at school was far from easy for Harry, Hermione, and Ron. Despite their claims of full recovery, Madame Pomfrey remained adamant about keeping them in the school hospital for observation. She insisted they drink a variety of strange potions daily and frequently check their pupils for any disturbing changes. A week had passed since the werewolf incident, and as the weekend approached, Harry's patience wore thin. Desperate to reunite with his classmates, he pleaded with Madame Pomfrey. "I swear on my life, Madame Pomfrey, none of us were bitten by a werewolf." "That's not entirely accurate," Madame Pomfrey retorted, deftly holding Harry's eyelids open while illuminating his emerald green eyes with her wand. "You have no idea how many scars you three had when you were brought back. While no bite marks were found, studies suggest that werewolf claws can also cause lesions. If we can't completely rule out this possibility, imagine the chaos if you went mad in the common room or classroom." She shuddered at the thought, releasing Harry's eyelids and turning her attention to Hermione, who was trying to avoid the examination. "But," Ron interjected, "Snape and Hagrid were released ages ago, weren't they? They were seriously injured too, so why are we still here?" "Oh, Mr. Weasley," Madame Pomfrey replied, casually opening Hermione's other eyelid. "Professor Snape is skilled in potions, and those proficient in potions often excel in healing. He can detect any adverse changes in his body. As for Hagrid, yes, he was bitten by a werewolf, but Dumbledore assured us that his unique bloodline offers significant resistance to the virus." "Unique bloodline?" Harry paused, rubbing his eyes, and stared at Madame Pomfrey, who had moved on to examine Ron. "Hagrid has a special bloodline?" "Please don't interrupt my work, Mr. Potter," Madame Pomfrey snapped, perhaps still irked by Ron's earlier questioning. She was a bit rough with Ron, causing him to wince in pain. "But Madame Pomfrey," Hermione pleaded, her eyes red, "we've missed a week of homework. Professor McGonagall won't be pleased if we fail our final exams." Despite their efforts, they couldn't persuade Madame Pomfrey to release them. However, she agreed to consult with Headmaster Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall during lunch. To mitigate any potential danger, Madame Pomfrey placed them in separate wards, forbidding contact with other students and only allowing them to meet during inspections. Yet, thanks to Harry's invisibility cloak, these restrictions were easily circumvented. Half an hour later, Harry and Ron reunited in Hermione's ward. She lay on the wooden cabinet next to her bed, engrossed in self-study, seemingly ignoring their arrival. While Harry and Ron didn't mind a brief respite from their demanding classes, being confined to the school hospital for a week without outside contact felt like imprisonment. "I thought we'd be celebrated," Ron lamented, staring at the cold ceiling with a despondent expression. "Instead, the school treats heroes like ghouls, locking us away in a small, enclosed space." Harry shared Ron's gloom, feeling the weight of their situation. The Daily Prophet had been filled with stories about Professor Blaine lately, but there was no mention of Peter or Sirius. Objectively speaking, Hermione said, her quill scratching rapidly across the parchment. Without looking up, she continued, "We didn't really make a difference that night, did we?" "Are you crazy?" Ron exclaimed, his cheeks puffing out in surprise. Even Harry stared at Hermione in disbelief, thinking she might be a bit delirious from missing classes. "Think about it," Hermione replied calmly. "Sirius wasn't saved by us. It was Hagrid, Professor Lupin, Professor Snape, and the centaurs who drove Greyback away. Sure, we captured Peter, but we can't talk about it publicly. We used the time turner, after a bray, LL. Harry and Ron exchanged glances, unable to immediately refute Hermione's logic. After a moment, Ron frowned and countered. "But Hagrid, Professor Lupin, and Snape went into the Forbidden Forest because of us, right? If we hadn't broken the school rules, Sirius would have fallen victim to Peter's plot." Harry nodded in agreement, recalling that their venture into the Forbidden Forest was triggered by Scabbers appearing at the lounge door. However, when they traveled back in time, the Marauders map showed Scabbers near the forest's edge, suggesting the one they saw was a decoy. Ron hadn't traveled back with them, so he was unaware of these details, but Hermione, with her sharp mind, must have realized something was amiss. Hermione sighed, not continuing the discussion. She was preoccupied with the time turner. Professor Blaine had taken the damaged device from her, promising to fix it, but he hadn't returned to school that week. "What's that?" Hermione glanced under her pillow instinctively. Harry, observing her expression, followed her gaze and noticed a magazine corner peeking out. The scene felt familiar. Ron quickly pulled out the magazine, blocking Hermione's angry reach with one hand while holding the magazine aloft with the other. "Wizard Weekly. My mum loves this," Ron grunted. As he and Harry noticed the handsome, smiling wizard on the cover, they couldn't help but smirk. "So," Ron began, trying to suppress his laughter as Hermione glared at them with a fury that could melt stone. "Professor Blaine has inherited Lockhart's reputation as a charmer, and you've transferred your admiration from Lockhart to him?" "That's none of your business, Ron," Hermione shouted, leaping up to snatch the magazine back. She didn't know why, but she felt compelled to explain. "Professor Blaine's knowledge is genuine." Ron shrugged. "Why all the secrecy? When Harry and I snuck out last night, we overheard some Ravenclaw girls in the corridor gossiping about whether Professor Blaine had a girlfriend. Honestly, it's silly. Professor Blaine wouldn't be interested in a young witch with a face full of acne." Boom. Harry wasn't sure what nerve Ron had struck, but Hermione's anger intensified. Her amber eyes blazed with a fierce light. Sensing danger, Ron and Harry retreated, only to trip over each other and tumble to the ground. "Potter, Weasley, what on earth are you doing?" The ward door swung open abruptly. Professor McGonagall's lips were pressed into a thin line, her eyes stern and unwavering. End of this chapter.